The well that swallowed truth. When 8-year-old Lena Holloway collapsed face first into the snow beside the town well, 17 people saw her fall. Mrs. Garrett at the mercantile. The Wilson brothers loading their wagon. Even Reverend Shaw, who just finished his noon meal. Every single one of them looked, and then looked away. Because in Ridgway, Montana Territory, the Holloway name had become a curse whispered behind closed doors, a warning mothers gave their children about asking too many questions. The girl lay there, small and still, her bucket rolling across frozen ground. No one moved, until a stranger on the ridge above town started running. Welcome to a story about the silence that kills and the courage that breaks it. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. Now settle in, because what happened in Ridgway in the winter of 1887 changed everything. The wind that morning carried the kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. Ethan Cole sat his horse on the pine-covered ridge overlooking Ridgway, watching smoke rise from chimneys in thin gray columns that dissolved into a sky the color of old pewter. He'd been drifting for 3 years now, ever since he'd buried his wife and daughter in a town he couldn't bear to name, and he'd learned to read settlements the way other men read newspapers. Ridgway looked prosperous enough. 2-story buildings lined Main Street, their false fronts painted and maintained. A church with a proper steeple. Even a small hotel with curtains in the windows. But prosperity and decency didn't always keep the same company, and Ethan had stopped trusting appearances around the time he'd stopped trusting God. He was about to turn his mare toward the road that would take him past the town entirely when movement below caught his eye. A child, small even for what looked like 8 or 9 years, struggled toward the town well with a wooden bucket that seemed to weigh more than she did. Her coat was too thin for the weather, patched at the elbows with fabric that didn't quite match. Dark hair escaped from beneath a gray knit cap. She moved with the careful determination of someone who'd learned that falling down cost more than getting back up ever gained. Ethan watched because there was nothing else to watch, because the morning was slow, and his coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The girl reached the well and set down her bucket with both hands, her breath coming in visible puffs. She worked the handle of the pump, her whole body throwing weight into each downward push. Then she stopped. Her hand went to her forehead. Even from the ridge, Ethan could see her sway. She took one step backward, then another. Then she simply folded, knees giving out, falling forward into the snow like a puppet with cut strings. The bucket clattered against the well's stone base. The sound echoed in the morning quiet. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. He waited for the rush of adults that would surely come. The girl had fallen maybe 30 yards from the mercantile, close enough that anyone inside would have heard. The church stood even closer. Surely someone had been watching. Through the window of the mercantile, a woman's shape moved. She took 2 steps toward the door, then stopped, turned back to whatever task occupied her counter. Near the livery stable, 2 men loading a wagon glanced toward the well. The taller one said something to his companion. They both returned to their work, shoulders hunched against more than just the wind. A man in a dark coat and white collar, the Reverend, Ethan guessed, emerged from a small house beside the church. He saw the fallen child. Ethan watched him see her, watched the recognition and calculation play across features Ethan could barely distinguish at this distance, but understood perfectly anyway. The Reverend adjusted his hat and walked in the opposite direction, his pace just slightly faster than necessity required. The girl hadn't moved. Snow was already beginning to gather on her dark coat. "Jesus Christ," Ethan whispered, though the words felt hollow in his mouth, prayers from a language he'd forgotten how to speak. He was halfway down the ridge before he'd made a conscious decision to move, the mare picking her way through snow and pine needles with the careful confidence of an animal who'd carried her rider through worse terrain than this. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from exertion, but from a fury so pure it tasted like copper on his tongue. 3 years. 3 years he'd been hollow, moving through the world like smoke through a room, touching nothing, leaving no mark. 3 years of telling himself that caring was the luxury of men who still had something to lose. And here he was, running toward a child he didn't know in a town that had already shown him exactly what it was made of. His boots hit Main Street at a run. The packed snow crunched beneath his heels. Somewhere a door closed, not slammed, just quietly, deliberately shut. He didn't look to see whose. His eyes stayed fixed on the small shape beside the well. She was breathing. He saw that first, the slight rise and fall of her back. Relief and rage fought for space in his chest as he dropped to his knees beside her, snow soaking through his pants. "Hey there," he said, his voice gentler than he'd heard it in years. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. She tried to speak but only managed a sound somewhere between a cough and a whimper. When he carefully turned her over, he saw a face far too thin, cheekbones sharp beneath skin gone gray with exhaustion. Her eyes opened, brown, fever-bright, terrified. "Don't," she managed. "Don't touch me. They'll— Easy now." Ethan pulled off his coat, the heavy sheepskin one that had cost him 2 weeks' wages back when he still worked for wages. He wrapped it around her shoulders. "I'm not going to hurt you. What's your name?" "Lena." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Lena Holloway. You shouldn't— You have to go. They'll see you with me, and then— Then what?" Ethan looked up at the buildings surrounding them. Curtains moved in windows. Faces appeared and disappeared. No one came out. "Then they'll ignore me the way they're ignoring you?" Fresh tears cut tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Mama needs water. She's sick. I have to—" She tried to sit up and nearly blacked out again. Ethan caught her before her head could hit the ground. "Where's home?" he asked. "The farm, West Edge, past the—" Her eyes lost focus. Ethan didn't wait for more. He stood, lifting her as he rose. She weighed next to nothing, all sharp bones and desperate need. The bucket lay where it had fallen. He left it there. Whatever disease or doom the people of Ridgeway thought lived in the Holloway name, Ethan Cole had already died once, 3 years ago, in a town that had also turned away when it mattered. He'd been walking dead ever since. What was one more ghost? The farm revealed itself in stages as he rode, Lena limp against his chest. First the fence, half fallen, posts leaning at drunken angles. Then the barn, roof sagging under snow it probably wouldn't survive another month carrying. Finally the house itself, small, unpainted, smoke rising from a chimney that leaned like everything else here, defying gravity through stubbornness alone. Ethan had seen poverty before. Hell, he'd lived it. But this was different. This was poverty with intention behind it, isolation enforced by something more than just hard luck. He was still 50 yards from the porch when the door opened and a woman emerged with a shotgun. "That's far enough." Her voice carried clear and cold across the snow. "Put her down and ride on." "Ma'am, she collapsed in town. She needs—" "I know what she needs." The woman's hands shook, but the barrel stayed level, pointed at his chest. "I also know this town. You carried her out here for a reason, and it's not charity, so state your business or leave." Ethan reined in his mare. Lena stirred against him, murmuring something he couldn't quite hear. "Mama," she said, louder now. "Mama, it's okay. He helped me." The shotgun lowered an inch. Not much, but enough. In the thin morning light, Ethan could see the woman properly now, maybe 30, dark hair the same shade as her daughter's, eyes sunken with exhaustion and fever. She wore a man's coat over a nightdress, boots unlaced, and she swayed where she stood. "Mrs. Holloway?" Ethan kept his voice level. "I'm going to step down now. I'm armed, but I'm not reaching for anything except your daughter. Understood?" A long pause. Then a nod, jerky with fever. He dismounted slowly, Lena still in his arms. Up close he could see the woman was in worse shape than her daughter. Her face flushed, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold, her breath coming in short gasps that suggested lungs filling with things that shouldn't be there. "Inside," she managed. "Quickly." The house's interior matched its exterior, sparse, clean despite obvious poverty, everything worn but cared for. A fire burned in the hearth, barely adequate against the cold that seeped through gaps in the walls. 2 beds occupied opposite corners, a table, 2 chairs, some dishes. Nothing extra. Nothing that couldn't be loaded in a wagon in under an hour if running became necessary. Ethan laid Lena on the smaller bed. She was already asleep or unconscious. He couldn't tell which. When he turned, Mrs. Holloway had sunk into one of the chairs, the shotgun across her lap, her eyes closed. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday. Maybe the day before." She opened her eyes with visible effort. "There's cornmeal in the tin, some dried beans. You can take what you want as payment for bringing her home. Then you need to leave before anyone sees you here." "I'm not looking for payment." "Everyone's looking for something." The words came out flat, worn smooth by repetition. "That's what this town taught me." Ethan crossed to the stove, found the cornmeal, started working by instinct. The motions of cooking something his hands remembered even when his mind had gone somewhere else. He'd made enough trail meals in the past 3 years to do this half asleep. "Your husband," he said, keeping his tone careful. "Is he dead?" Mrs. Holloway's voice didn't change. 4 months ago. Accident at the well, they said. Fell in, hit his head, drowned in 3 feet of water before anyone found him. Strange accident for a man who'd been working that well for 8 years, but that's what they called it. Accident. The mush began to bubble. Ethan stirred it, not looking at her. They said, "You don't think so?" "I think my daughter saw something she wasn't supposed to see. I think she told me about it. I think we told the marshal. And I think this town decided that having us around was less convenient than making us disappear." She coughed, a wet sound that shook her whole frame. "They're patient about it, I'll give them that. No dramatic threats, no violence, just closed doors and empty shelves at the mercantile when I try to buy food. Just silence when I call for a doctor. Just looking away when my child collapses in the street." Ethan divided the mush between 2 bowls. He carried one to her, watched her stare at it like she'd forgotten what eating was for. "What did your daughter see?" he asked. Mrs. Holloway looked up at him then, really looked, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to turn away. Whatever she found there must have satisfied something, because she picked up the spoon. "You should go," she said, "before this becomes your problem too." "Maybe I'm tired of walking away from problems." "Tired?" She laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "Mister, you haven't even started being tired. Not the way this town does tired." She ate 3 bites. On the 4th, her hand started shaking so badly, she had to set the spoon down. Ethan took the bowl, helped her to the other bed, bigger, with quilts piled high, the kind of nest someone made when cold had become a permanent resident. "Lena saw Judge Hale's enforcer push my husband into the well," Mrs. Holloway said, her eyes already closing. "Man named Silas Mercer. There was an argument about land rights, about documents my husband found in the courthouse records that didn't match the deeds, about who really owns what in this town and who's been stealing it for 20 years. The name hit Ethan like a fist to the gut. Silas Mercer. He'd known that name once, hunted it across 2 territories, lost everything in the process, and here it was again, surfacing in a nothing town in Montana like a corpse that refused to stay buried. "You know him," Mrs. Holloway said. Not a question. "Once, long time ago." "Then you know running won't help. You know he'll come eventually." Her breathing had gone shallow. "Take Lena. Take her east. Find her an aunt in St. Louis. Take the documents from the well. They're still there, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in the stonework. Take them to someone who cares about law more than land. Take—" Sleep took her mid-sentence, dragging her down with the weight of fever and exhaustion. Ethan stood there, listening to her labored breathing, looking at the child in the other bed, thinking about a well that held more than water. Outside, snow had started falling again. Through the window, he could see his mare waiting patiently, already half covered. He should saddle up, ride out. He delivered the girl safely. That was more than most men would have done. Instead, he found himself building up the fire, finding more blankets, checking the woman's forehead, burning hot. Checking the child's. Cooler, but still too warm. Looking around the small house for medicine and finding none. The well stood visible from the window, a dark shape against fresh snow. Ethan had spent 3 years running from ghosts, from his wife's grave, from his daughter's empty room, from the sound of Silas Mercer's laughter the day he'd ridden away from justice because Ethan had been one day too slow, one step too far behind. 3 years of telling himself that the world was broken and he was just another broken piece in it, that caring was for men who still believed in things like right and wrong, justice and mercy. But here was a child who'd watched her father murdered and been punished for telling the truth. Here was a woman dying by degrees because a town had decided her life was worth less than its secrets. Here was Silas Mercer's name again, after all this time, still attached to cruelty and theft. Here was a choice. Ethan pulled on his coat. Lena stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about her father, about water, about being sorry. He paused at her bedside, adjusted her blankets, and felt something in his chest that he'd thought had died with his family. The weight of responsibility, the burden of carrying what happened next. "I'll be back," he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him. "I'm going to fix this." He didn't know if he was lying. The well looked smaller up close, just a cylinder of stacked stones with a wooden roof and a hand pump. Snow had drifted against its base. No footprints except the ones Lena had left that morning, already half filled. Ethan worked the pump handle, felt resistance, pulled harder. Water gushed into the bucket he'd retrieved from where it still lay in the street. He let it fill, then dumped it. Filled it again, dumped it. Working the mechanism, watching the water, thinking about a man drowning in 3 feet of it. On the 5th pump, something shifted. A grinding sound, stone on stone. He stopped, knelt, ran his hands along the well's interior stones, feeling for anything unusual. There, a gap in the mortar wider than it should be. He dug at it with his fingers, felt something give. With effort, he pulled a stone loose. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth just like Mrs. Holloway had said, sat a bundle of documents. Ethan pulled them free, brushed off snow and cobwebs. The oilcloth was stained but intact. Inside, papers, dozens of them, deeds, transfer documents, courthouse records, all annotated in a careful hand that he guessed belonged to the late Mr. Holloway. Notes in the margins, dates that didn't match, signatures that appeared on multiple documents in slightly different inks, a map of Ridgeway and the surrounding territory with properties marked in different colors, a record of systematic theft spanning 2 decades, and at the center of it, over and over, 2 names, Judge Rourke Hale and Silas Mercer. Ethan was still kneeling there, documents spread around him in the snow, when he heard the horses. 4 riders came around the barn, moving slowly, deliberately. They spread out as they approached, hands near weapons but not quite touching them. Professional. Careful. Men who'd done this before. The lead rider was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome before whatever lived behind his eyes had started showing through. He smiled when he saw Ethan, the kind of smile that didn't involve anything but his mouth. "Help you with something, friend?" the man asked. Ethan stood slowly, leaving the documents in the snow. "Just getting water for the family." "That's so?" The rider's eyes moved to the papers. "Funny kind of water. Looks more like private property to me. Funny kind of town that lets children die in the street." The smile stayed fixed. Children die everywhere. It's a hard world. Some families just have harder luck than others. He nudged his horse forward 2 steps. "Name's Mercer, Silas Mercer. Work for Judge Hale. Keep the peace around here. And you are?" Of course it was him. Ethan felt something cold and certain settle in his gut. Silas looked older, heavier, but the eyes were the same, flat, calculating, empty of anything that might have passed for human warmth. "Cole," Ethan said. "Ethan Cole. We've met before." Recognition flickered across Silas's face, then genuine pleasure. "Well, I'll be damned. The marshal's dog. Heard you'd given up the chase. Heard you'd lost something important. Wife and daughter, wasn't it? House fire, if I recall. Terrible tragedy." The other riders shifted in their saddles. This was going somewhere now. Somewhere they recognized. "What brings you to Ridgeway, Cole?" Silas continued. "Can't imagine you're here by accident. Can't imagine you'd still be stupid enough to think you could finish what you couldn't finish 3 years ago." Ethan's hand hung loose by his side, inches from his revolver. The mathematics of 4 against 1 played out in his head. Bad odds. Worse if he cared about survival. The problem was, he'd stopped caring about that a long time ago. "I'm here because a child needed help," Ethan said. "I'm staying because your name is attached to murder and theft, and I'm tired of letting you ride away." Silas laughed, the sound echoing off the barn walls. "You're going to stop me? You couldn't stop me in Colorado when you had a badge and a dozen deputies. You think you can do it now, alone, in a town where everyone answers to Judge Hale?" "Don't need the whole town, just need the truth." Ethan gestured to the documents. "And I'm standing on it." The laughter stopped. Silas's expression went flat, dangerous. "Those papers don't leave this farm, and neither do you. That's just facts, Cole. Simple mathematics." "Maybe. But there's a woman and a child in that house who've seen enough dying. They get to walk away clean. That's my price." "Your price?" Silas shook his head. "You don't get to set prices anymore. You lost that privilege when you lost everything else." He glanced at his men. "Burn it. House, barn, papers, everything. Make sure they're inside when you do." The men moved, separating, surrounding. Ethan's hand went to his gun. Then a shotgun blast shattered the morning quiet. Mrs. Holloway stood on the porch, the weapon still smoking in her hands. She was swaying, barely upright, but her voice carried clear across the yard. "Next one goes through flesh instead of sky," she said. "Leave, now." Silas studied her with the detached interest of a man calculating acceptable losses. "You can barely stand, Mrs. Holloway. How many shots you think you'll get off before my men put you down?" "Enough." She pumped the shotgun, the sound sharp and final. "You want to find out? My husband's already dead. I'm halfway there myself. You think I care about taking some of you with me?" A standoff, frozen in snow and morning light. 4 mounted men, 1 dying woman, and Ethan caught between them with a gun in his hand and evidence scattered at his feet. Then Lena appeared in the doorway behind her mother, small and pale, holding what looked like her father's revolver in both hands. "I saw you kill him," she said, her child's voice cutting through the tension. "I saw you push him in the well. I told everyone, but they wouldn't listen. But I'll keep telling, forever. Every person who comes through this territory, every lawman, every judge, every newspaper, I'll tell them what you did." Something shifted in Silas's face. For just a moment, Ethan saw calculation give way to something uglier, the look of a man who'd kill a child and sleep fine afterward. "Well then," Silas said quietly, "I guess we do this the hard way." He reached for his weapon. His men did the same. Mrs. Holloway raised the shotgun, and Ethan fired. Not at Silas, that would have gotten him killed before his second shot, at the horse. The animal screamed and reared, throwing Silas backward into the snow. The other horses spooked, their riders fighting for control. Ethan dove for the documents, scooping them up as Mrs. Holloway's shotgun roared again, this time aimed low, peppering the snow in front of the nearest rider's horse. "Inside!" Ethan shouted. "Now!" He ran for the porch as bullets started flying. Wood splintered around him. Mrs. Holloway fired again, then stumbled backward through the doorway. Ethan caught her as she fell, hauled her into the house, Lena scrambling after them. He kicked the door shut as something heavy hit it from outside. They had maybe 30 seconds before Silas's men regrouped. Maybe a minute if they were lucky. The house had 2 windows and 1 door. No back exit. No root cellar. Nowhere to run. Ethan moved to the window, checked the yard. 3 riders had dismounted, taking cover behind the barn and wagon. Silas was on his feet, rage written clear across his face. The 4th rider was circling toward the back of the house. "How many shells you got?" Ethan asked Mrs. Holloway. She was on the floor now, back against the wall, the shotgun across her lap. 3, maybe 4. She coughed, blood flecking her lips. "This wasn't how I wanted this to end." "It's not ending." Ethan checked his own ammunition. 12 rounds, not enough. "You said there's an aunt in St. Louis?" "My sister, Sarah Brennan. She'd take Lena." Mrs. Holloway looked at her daughter, who'd retreated to the corner, the revolver still clutched in her small hands. "Baby, go to the bedroom. Hide under the bed. Don't come out until—" "I'm not hiding." Lena's voice shook but held. "I'm not running. They need to pay for what they did to Papa." "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing," Ethan said, surprised to hear himself saying it, surprised he still believed it might be true. "Your father found evidence. That evidence can put them away legal. but only if someone gets it to people who care about law more than land. Who? Mrs. Holloway asked. Who in this territory would stand up to Judge Hale? Territorial Governor's Office in Helena, Federal Marshal Service. Hell, newspapers in Denver, if nothing else. Your husband did the hard work already. He found the truth. We just have to keep it alive long enough to matter, a voice called from outside. Cole, Mrs. Holloway, let's be reasonable about this. Silas, using his bargaining voice, which meant he didn't want to assault a fortified position if he could avoid it, which meant maybe, just maybe, they had leverage. Ethan moved to the door, stayed to the side, called back. Define reasonable. Simple trade. You give me the papers, I let you walk. All three of you, safe passage to wherever you want to go. Clean slate, fresh start. And we're supposed to trust the man who murdered William Holloway? A pause. Then, never said I killed him. Girl's mistaken. Grief does strange things to children's memories. Beside the wall, Lena made a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl. She's not mistaken, Ethan said. And you're not getting these papers, so we're at what they call an impasse. No impasse, Cole. Simple mathematics, like I said. You got maybe a dozen rounds in that pistol. Woman's got 3, maybe 4 shells. We got time, ammunition, and reinforcements coming from town. Judge Hale's already sent for more men. By sundown, there'll be 20 guns surrounding this house. You can't win. Best you can do is choose how you lose. Mrs. Holloway met Ethan's eyes across the room. Her face had gone gray, sweat soaking through her nightdress despite the cold. She had hours left, maybe less. The fever would take her whether Silas did or not. Take Lena, she whispered. Take the papers. There's a root cellar under the barn, has a tunnel that leads to the creek. My husband built it during the bad years when the Blackfeet still raided. You can make it to the tree line before they know you're gone. And leave you to whatever they do when they realize we're not here? I'm already dead, just a matter of when. She smiled, tired and sad. But my daughter gets to live. My husband's work gets to matter. That's not nothing. That's better than what we had this morning. Mama, no. Hush, baby. Mrs. Holloway looked at her daughter with an expression that broke something in Ethan's chest. You listen to Mr. Cole. You go to Aunt Sarah. You tell her everything. You grow up and you remember that your father was a good man who tried to do right, and that's worth more than gold or land or whatever else people kill for. You remember that. Promise me. Lena was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dust on her face. I promise. Outside, Silas called again. Running out of patience, Cole. Ethan looked at the documents in his hand, looked at the dying woman, looked at the child who'd already lost everything and was about to lose more. 3 years he'd been dead inside. 3 years of telling himself that honor was a luxury and justice was a lie. That the world was broken and staying broken, and all a man could do was keep walking until his legs gave out. But here was a man who died trying to expose the truth. Here was a woman trading her last hours for her daughter's future. Here was a child who'd looked into the face of evil and refused to pretend she hadn't seen it. Here was a choice that mattered. We go together, Ethan said. All 3 of us? You can ride. I've seen people sicker than you stay in a saddle through sheer spite. We get to the tree line, then to Helena. We deliver these papers personally. We see this through to the end. I can't. You can, because your daughter needs to see that justice is possible, that speaking truth doesn't always end in graves. You can give her that. Last gift a mother can give. He crossed to her, offered his hand. What do you say, Mrs. Holloway? Feel like spitting in death's eye one more time? She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Mara, she said, if we're going to die together, you should at least know my name. The root cellar entrance lay hidden beneath a rotting piece of canvas and 3 years of accumulated hay. Ethan pulled it open while Mara leaned against the barn wall, her breathing labored, Lena pressed close to her side. The tunnel below smelled of earth and darkness, and the kind of desperate planning that came from knowing violence was always one bad season away. How far to the creek? Ethan asked. 100 yards, maybe more. Mara's voice came thin and stretched. Opens up behind a deadfall. William used to practice the route with Lena. Made it into a game. She knows the way. Above them, Silas was still calling terms, his voice carrying false patience. The other men had gone quiet, which meant they were positioning themselves, cutting off escape routes, making sure this ended the way they wanted it to end. Ethan helped Mara down the ladder first, then Lena. The girl moved with the quick certainty of someone who'd made this climb before, in better times, when survival was practice instead of necessity. He followed, pulling the canvas and hay back over the entrance as he descended, plunging them into darkness broken only by thin shafts of light through gaps in the barn floor above. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a grown man's shoulders. Ethan went first now, crawling, the oilcloth bundle of documents tucked inside his shirt. Behind him, he could hear Mara's ragged breathing, Lena whispering encouragement her mother probably couldn't hear over the sound of her own failing lungs. Dirt fell from the ceiling, tree roots caught at his coat. The tunnel curved left, then right, following the contours of creek and slope that William Holloway had mapped out years ago, planning for a raid that never came, building salvation for a danger he couldn't have imagined. Light appeared ahead. Gray and cold, but light nonetheless. Ethan crawled faster, emerged into freezing air and the sound of running water. The creek was shallow here, already starting to ice over at the edges. The deadfall Mara had mentioned created a natural blind, hiding the tunnel mouth from anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. He turned back, reached into the darkness, found Lena's hand, pulled her out into the open. Then together they reached for Mara. She'd stopped moving 10 feet from the exit. "Mama!" Lena tried to scramble back down, but Ethan caught her. "I'll get her. Stay here. Watch for movement from the house." He crawled back into the tunnel, found Mara collapsed against the wall, her eyes closed, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. When he touched her shoulder, she jerked awake, disoriented, fighting. "It's me," Ethan said. "Almost there. Another few yards." "Can't." The word came out wet. "Told you. I'm done." "You're not done until I say you're done. Now move." He got behind her, pushed when she didn't have the strength to pull herself forward. Inch by inch, they made progress toward the light. Behind them, from far off, came the sound of splintering wood. The house door giving way, shouting. Men discovering an empty room and a trapdoor hidden under a rug. They had minutes now. Maybe less. Mara collapsed again at the tunnel mouth. This time when Ethan pulled her into the open air, she didn't fight, just lay there, gasping like a landed fish. Lena dropped to her knees beside her mother, tears streaming. "We have to move," Ethan said, hating himself for saying it. "They'll find the tunnel." "Then go." Mara's eyes opened, fixed on her daughter. "Take her. I'll tell them you went north, buy you time." "No." Lena's voice came out fierce despite the tears. "We go together. You promised. You said we'd see Aunt Sarah. You promised." "Baby, I can't." "Then I'll carry you." The girl tried. Actually got her arms under her mother's shoulders, tried to lift. Failed. Tried again. Kept trying until Ethan gently moved her aside. "I've got her," he said. "But we need to move fast and quiet. Can you do that?" Lena nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Ethan lifted Mara. She weighed almost nothing, fever having burned through whatever reserves she'd been living on. He settled her as gently as he could, then started moving upstream, using the creek bed itself as a path, stepping on stones to avoid leaving tracks in the snow that covered the banks. Behind them, more shouting. Closer now. Someone had found the cellar entrance. The trees thickened as they climbed, pine and aspen, bare branches stark against gray sky. Ethan's boots slipped on ice-covered rocks. Mara's breathing had taken on a rattling quality that he recognized from field hospitals during the war, from deathbeds he'd sat beside when he still wore a badge, and caring about strangers was part of the job description. Lena walked beside them, silent now, her small face set with a determination that reminded him painfully of his own daughter. Emma had been 9 when she died, would have been 12 now, would have been fierce and stubborn and probably angry with him for all the ways he'd failed to save her. He pushed the thought away. Ghosts were a luxury he couldn't afford right now. They made it half a mile before Mara started coughing in earnest. The sound echoed off the rocks, loud enough to carry. Ethan found an overhang, a small space where the creek bank had been carved out by spring flooding. He set Mara down as gently as he could. "Stay with her," he told Lena. I'm going to see how close they are. Don't leave us. I'm not leaving, just looking. 2 minutes. He made it back to the last ridge in 90 seconds. From there, he could see the farm, small and exposed in the valley below. Smoke rose from the barn. They'd fired it, destroying evidence or sending a message or both. 4 men worked the property. Another 2 were entering the tunnel. And coming up the creek bed, following tracks Ethan hadn't been careful enough to hide, Silas Mercer rode with 2 more men flanking him. They were maybe 10 minutes behind, less if they moved fast. Ethan slid back down the slope. Lena looked up as he approached, hope and fear warring in her expression. "How close?" she asked. "Close enough we need to talk about options." He knelt beside them, checked Mara's pulse. Thready, irregular. Her skin had gone from flush to pale, and when she opened her eyes they took a moment to focus. "Tell me," she whispered. 7 men between us and anywhere safe. More coming from town, probably. We can keep running, but you're leaving a blood trail, and I'm leaving boot prints. They'll catch us before nightfall. So we fight. Lena's hand went to the revolver tucked in her belt. Her father's gun, too big for her small hands, but held with absolute conviction. We'd lose. I'm good, but I'm not that good. Ethan pulled out the oilcloth bundle. But these documents are worth more than our lives. Worth more than this whole damn valley. If they survive, everything your father died for matters. If they don't, Silas and the judge just keep stealing and killing until someone else is brave enough to stand up. Mara struggled to sit upright. What are you saying? I'm saying one of us needs to play decoy while the other 2 get these papers to Helena. Lead them on a chase, give you time to disappear into the high country. There's trappers up there, trading posts, people who don't ask questions. You could make it. You mean you'll play decoy? Not a question. I'm the one they want most. Silas has history with me. He'll follow. And die trying to kill you. Probably, but that buys you days, maybe a week, long enough to reach someone who cares about law. Lena looked between them, understanding dawning on her young face. No, we stay together. You said together. I said we'd see this through to the end, Ethan corrected gently. Didn't say we'd all survive it. Your mother needs a doctor. You need your aunt. These papers need Helena. I need to make sure Silas Mercer doesn't hurt anyone else. We all get what we need, just not together. That's dying, Lena's voice broke. That's just dying with extra words. Maybe. Or maybe it's the first useful thing I've done in 3 years. Mara reached out, caught his hand. Her grip was weak but insistent. Why? You don't know us. Don't owe us anything. Why die for strangers? Ethan looked at her, at Lena, at the bundle of papers that represented one good man's last attempt to matter. He thought about his wife, his daughter, the house fire that had taken them while he'd been 3 territories away chasing a man who'd slipped through his fingers. He thought about the rage and grief that had hollowed him out, left him walking through the world like smoke, touching nothing, meaning nothing, just waiting for the wind to finally scatter what was left. Because strangers are just family, you haven't failed yet, he said quietly. And I'm tired of failing. Before Mara could respond, voices echoed up the creek bed, closer than they should have been. The men were moving faster than Ethan had calculated. He stood, made a decision. There's a game trail about 50 yards north, follows the ridgeline. In 2 miles, you'll hit the territorial road. Flag down any wagon heading east, tell them you've got cholera. No one will look too close. From the road, it's 3 days to Helena if you push. Can you ride that long? I'll ride until I can't, Mara said. Then Lena will ride and I'll walk. Then she'll drag me. We'll make it. Take my mare. She's still tied at your farm, but she'll come if I whistle. Smart horse. Smarter than me most days. He pulled out his revolver, checked the cylinder, then handed it to Mara. 12 shots. Don't waste them. The governor's office is on Last Chance Gulch. Ask for Marshal Davies. Tell him Ethan Cole sent you. Tell him I'm calling in the favor from Cheyenne. What favor? One I just invented. But Davies is honest and he hates men like Silas. That's enough. Lena grabbed his arm. Come with us, please. We can all hide, all run. They'd track us down in a day. This way, you've got a chance. He knelt, met her eyes. Your father stood up when it mattered, died for it. Your mother's doing the same. Now it's my turn. Don't make it meaningless by getting caught because you felt guilty. I don't feel guilty. I feel like I'm watching another person die. Then watch close. Learn something. Learn that some things matter more than surviving. He touched her shoulder, the gesture awkward and unpracticed. You're going to do great things, Lena Holloway. You're going to grow up and make this territory better. But first you have to grow up, understand? She nodded, tears streaming again. Ethan helped Mara to her feet. She swayed but stayed upright, jaw set against pain and weakness. The well, she said. William hid something else there. In the bottom. A metal box with more papers, bank records, account numbers. We couldn't reach it without draining the whole thing, but if you're going back, I'm not going back, I'm going forward, leading them away. Then the box stays buried. Maybe someone else will find it, someone with time and tools and no one trying to kill them. He tucked the oilcloth bundle inside Lena's coat. Keep this dry. Don't show it to anyone except Marshal Davies. Don't trust anyone who asks too many questions. And if you see a newspaper reporter, tell them everything. Sometimes the press does what the law won't. The voices were closer now, near enough that Ethan could make out individual words. Silas calling orders, telling his men to spread out, to watch for ambush. Go, Ethan said. Now. Mara pulled Lena toward the game trail. The girl looked back once, her face a mask of grief and anger and something else. Determination, maybe? Or the first seeds of the woman she'd become if she survived this. Then they were gone, disappearing into the trees, and Ethan was alone with the creek and the coming violence. He whistled, two sharp notes that carried clear in the cold air. Somewhere down the valley his mare would hear, would come. He moved downstream, deliberately careless with his tracks, leaving boot prints in the snow, breaking branches, making sure anyone following would find him. The creek bent around a stand of boulders. Ethan positioned himself behind the largest, checking sight lines, calculating angles. Not the best position, but it would do. His hands were steady as he checked his remaining revolver. 6 shots, and the rifle he'd taken from Mara's house. 4 more. 10 rounds against 7 men. Poor odds. But he'd worked with worse. The first rider appeared around the bend. Not Silas, one of the younger ones, eager and careless. Ethan let him get close, watched him spot the tracks leading upstream, start to turn his horse. Looking for something? Ethan called. The man went for his gun, never cleared leather. Ethan's shot took him in the shoulder, spun him out of the saddle. The horse bolted. The man hit the frozen ground hard, crying out. Ethan didn't shoot again, just stepped into view, rifle leveled. Tell Silas I'm here, he said. Tell him it's time we finished what we started. The wounded man scrambled backward, clutching his shoulder. You're dead, you know that? Dead. Been dead 3 years. This is just making it official. The man ran, stumbling and sliding on ice, leaving a trail of blood. Ethan let him go. Wounded men slowed groups down, made leaders cautious, and he needed Silas cautious, needed him focused on the threat in front of him instead of the woman and child disappearing into the high country behind. He moved positions, climbing higher into the rocks. From there, he could see the whole creek bed, the approach from the valley, the narrow confines that would turn this into a close-quarters fight. Good defensive ground, expensive to take, the kind of place where attacking cost more than retreating. Exactly what he needed. Silas appeared 10 minutes later with 4 men. The wounded one must have reached them, delivered the message. They moved carefully now, using cover, spreading out. Professional. Ethan had known they would be. Cole! Silas's voice echoed off stone. That was stupid. Now someone's hurt and I'm angry. This could have been clean. Nothing about you has ever been clean, Ethan called back. Least of all your conscience. Conscience is for men who can afford it, ideal in reality. And the reality is you're alone, outnumbered, and running out of places to hide. Funny, I was about to say the same to you. Silence. Then Silas laughed, genuine amusement in the sound. I missed this, Cole. Missed having someone worth hunting. Last 3 years have been easy, boring, small people with small problems. But you're the real thing. Makes killing you mean something. Philosophical today must mean you're scared. Scared? Another laugh. Of what? You've got maybe 10 rounds left. I've got 4 men in all day. Math isn't complicated. Math never accounts for will. Your men are hired guns. I'm a man with nothing left to lose. Big difference when the shooting starts. Movement to the left. One of Silas's men trying to flank, using the tree line for cover. Ethan tracked him, waited until he broke into the open, fired. The shot went high, deliberately, but close enough to send the man diving back into cover. 7 rounds, Silas called, keeping count. 7 rounds, 4 men, 1 boss who's been running too long. Ethan shifted position again, staying mobile. How's it feel, Silas, being the one trapped for once? I'm not trapped. I'm patient. A pause. Where's the woman and child? Dead. Couldn't keep up. Had to leave them. Liar. You're the hero type. Always were. Bet you sent them running while you played rear guard. Noble, stupid, but noble. Believe what you want. I believe you're going to die here. Question is whether you take any of my men with you, and whether I bother chasing the woman and girl or just let the coal do my work for me. Rage flared hot in Ethan's chest. He forced it down, made his voice steady. You won't catch them. They're already gone, headed somewhere you can't follow. Everywhere somewhere I can follow. I've got Judge Hale's authority across 3 territories. I've got men in every town, every trading post, every place a person might run. She's sick, Cole. Dying. How far you think she'll make it before her body gives out? Far enough? Far enough for what? To die on a stranger's doorstep instead of her own? To make her daughter watch it happen somewhere cold and lonely instead of somewhere familiar? You didn't save them, just changed where they suffer. The words hit harder than they should have, because there was truth in them, ugly and unavoidable. Mara was dying. Lena was a child. The high country in winter was a graveyard for the unprepared. He might have traded one death for another, bought time that would only stretch out the inevitable. Unless the documents reached Helena. Unless someone with power and conscience decided that law mattered more than land. Unless William Holloway's death and Mara's sacrifice and Ethan's last stand added up to something more than just bodies in the snow. Unless justice was possible. Ethan moved again, circling higher. The sun had started its descent, shadows lengthening across the creek bed. In a few hours, darkness would come, and with it cold that could kill as efficiently as any bullet. He needed to keep Silas here, focused, engaged. Needed to be interesting enough to chase, dangerous enough to demand attention. Needed to matter, just for a little while longer. Tell me something, Silas, he called out. How'd you end up working for a man like Judge Hale? You used to have standards, low standards, but standards. Now you're just a hired killer in a nice coat. Standards don't pay. Hale does. Generously. And all it cost was your soul. Souls are overrated. Can't spend them, can't sleep with them. Can't use them to buy land or influence or comfort. Movement in the shadows. Silas circling, trying to locate Ethan's position by his voice. You had standards, Cole. Look where it got you. Dead family, dead career, dying alone on a mountain for people who won't remember your name. Better than living on my knees? Is it? Really? Your wife and daughter died because you were too busy chasing me to protect them, because your standards mattered more than their safety. How's that feel? When you're alone at night, how's that righteousness taste? Ethan's hands tightened on the rifle. The fire that had destroyed his house, killed his family. He'd always believed it was an accident. Bad wiring, dry timber, winter wind fanning flames. But the timing had been too perfect. 1 week after he'd gotten close to Silas in Colorado. 1 week after he'd raided a property that turned out to be connected to Judge Hale's operation. 1 week after he'd become a problem. You killed them, he said, the words coming out flat and certain. You set that fire. Silence. Then, prove it. Don't need to prove it, just need to know. Knowing changes nothing. They're still dead. You're still here. I'm still winning. Winning? Ethan laughed, bitter and cold. You call this winning? Running errands for a corrupt judge, killing farmers who ask questions, murdering women and children to keep your boss's secrets? That's not winning, Silas. That's just being a coward with a paycheck. Big talk from a man about to die. Everyone dies. Question is what you die for. I'm dying so a little girl gets to live. What are you dying for? I'm not dying today. Everyone says that, right up until they're wrong. Ethan fired. not at any particular target, just to keep them honest, to remind them he was still armed and dangerous. The shot echoed off the rocks, rolled down the valley, 6 rounds left. The return fire came from 3 directions simultaneously, coordinated, professional, deadly. Bullets sparked off stone around him. He rolled, came up firing, saw one of Silas's men go down clutching his leg. 5 rounds left. Still fighting? Silas sounded almost pleased. Good. Wouldn't be satisfying if you just gave up. Not in my nature. I know. That's why this has to end the way it does. Men like you don't surrender, don't compromise, don't understand that the world isn't about right and wrong, just power and the lack of it. The world is exactly about right and wrong. That's the only thing it's about. Then you're going to die disappointed. More movement. 2 men now, flanking from opposite sides while Silas kept him talking. Classic tactic. Effective if the target didn't see it coming. Ethan saw it coming. He waited until they were committed, out of cover, moving fast through the open space between rocks. Then he stood, fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot took the man on the left in the chest. The second hit the man on the right in the throat. Both went down hard. 3 rounds left. 2 men remaining plus Silas. The return fire was immediate and furious. Ethan dove behind the boulder, felt impacts shake the stone, heard ricochets wind past his head. He crawled, staying low, emerged 20 feet from where they expected him. "Getting expensive, Silas," he called. "How many men you willing to lose?" No answer. Which meant Silas was done talking. Done playing. Moving now, closing in, finishing this before it cost more than he could afford. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands were steady, but his body knew what his mind was trying to ignore. He was outgunned, low on ammunition, and running out of miracles. The best he could hope for was to take Silas with him. The worst was dying alone while Mara and Lena got caught anyway, making all of this meaningless. The smart move was to surrender, trade the documents for safe passage, live to fight another day. But Ethan Cole had stopped making smart moves 3 years ago when he'd buried his family and started hunting ghosts. And he'd be damned if he started being smart now. He moved again, higher into the rocks, watching sightlines, tracking shadows. The sun was lower now, turning the snow gold and red. Beautiful, the way the world was always beautiful when you might be seeing it for the last time. A sound behind him, boot on stone. Ethan spun, fired on instinct. The shot went wide, but close enough to send someone diving for cover. 2 rounds left. Silas's voice came from a different direction entirely. "Down to your last shots, Cole. What happens when you run dry?" "Same thing that always happens. I reload." "With what? You didn't bring spare ammunition? Saw your saddlebags back at the farm. Saw what you didn't pack." Damn. He was right. Ethan had left his supplies with the mare, planning to retrieve them, never imagining he'd end up here, trapped and running on empty. "Still got enough to make you bleed," Ethan said. "Maybe. But you're thinking about it now. About what comes after. About dying with an empty gun in your hand, knowing you failed to save anyone." "I didn't fail yet." Yet is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Ethan changed position again, his mind racing. 2 rounds. 2 men plus Silas. Even perfect shots wouldn't be enough. He needed an edge, an angle. Something to shift the odds. His eyes fell on the slope above him. Unstable scree, held in place by snow and friction. A rock slide waiting to happen. Dangerous for everyone, including him. But everyone dying was better than just him dying while Silas rode away. He aimed carefully, fired at the snowpack above the slope. The shot triggered a crack, sharp and definitive. Snow began to shift. "Run!" Silas shouted to his men. Ethan was already moving, scrambling sideways as the slope gave way. Rocks and snow cascaded down in a roar that drowned out shouting, drowned out everything except the sound of the mountain rearranging itself. He made it to solid ground as the avalanche hit where he'd been standing, kept going, swept across the creek bed, engulfed the positions where Silas's men had been hiding. The roar faded. Dust and snow hung in the air. Ethan stood, breathing hard, 1 round left in his revolver. The slope had settled into a new configuration. Where there had been a creek bed, there was now a wall of debris 30 feet high. And somewhere on the other side, Silas Mercer was either dead or extremely angry. Ethan waited, listened, heard nothing but wind and his own ragged breathing. Then, faint but distinct, coughing. The scrape of rock on rock, someone digging themselves out. He considered his options. 1 round, unknown number of enemies. High ground temporarily his, darkness coming. The smart move was to run, use the chaos to disappear into the high country, trust that Mara and Lena had gotten far enough away. But running meant never knowing if Silas survived, never knowing if the man would keep hunting, keep killing, keep serving Judge Hale's interests across 3 territories. Ethan started climbing the debris pile. The debris shifted beneath Ethan's boots, rocks sliding and settling with each step. He moved carefully, revolver drawn, 1 round chambered and ready. Below him, the coughing had stopped. Either someone had cleared their lungs or stopped breathing entirely. The silence stretched thin and dangerous across the devastated slope. Halfway up, he found the first body. One of Silas's men, crushed beneath a boulder the size of a bull. The man's eyes stared at nothing, his hand still gripping a revolver he'd never had time to fire. Ethan took the gun, checked the cylinder. 4 rounds. 5 total now. Slightly better odds. He kept climbing. The sun touched the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and blood. His shadow stretched long behind him, a dark shape against white snow. Exposed. Visible. An easy target for anyone watching from cover. No shots came. At the top of the debris pile, he could see both sides. Behind him, the direction he'd come from, creek bed and forest, and the lengthening shadows of early evening. Ahead, the path Silas and his men had been following, now buried under tons of rock and snow. And there, 20 yards downslope, moving among the wreckage with grim purpose, Silas Mercer searched for survivors. He'd lost his hat. Blood ran from a cut above his left eye, staining his collar dark. His coat was torn, revealing the heavy wool vest beneath. But he was alive, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd been hurt before and knew the difference between injuries that mattered and ones that didn't. He found the second body wedged between 2 rocks, checked for pulse, found none, moved on without ceremony. Professional, cold, a man who'd seen enough death that one more barely registered. Ethan aimed his revolver, finger on the trigger. 1 shot, center mass, end it clean. But something stopped him. Not mercy. He was fresh out of that particular virtue. Not uncertainty. He knew exactly what Silas deserved. Something else. Some need to understand, to hear the words said out loud, to confirm what he already knew about the fire that had taken everything from him. "Silas!" he called. The man froze. Then slowly, very slowly, turned to face the ridge. His hand was near his gun but not touching it. His eyes found Ethan across the distance, and something that might have been respect crossed his bloody face. "Persistent," Silas said. "I'll give you that." "The fire. 3 years ago. My house in Colorado. Tell me." "Why? What difference does it make now?" "Because I need to know if I'm killing a murderer or just a thief." Silas laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "You're killing both. But yeah, I set the fire. Hale's orders. You were getting too close, asking too many questions. He wanted you gone, but making you disappear would have brought federal attention. So we made it look like an accident. Bad wiring, dry timber, tragedy. Didn't know your family was home. That wasn't the plan." "The plan." Ethan's voice came out flat, empty of everything except a rage so cold it felt like drowning. "You burned my house down and killed my wife and daughter because I was inconvenient. I followed orders, did my job. You want to blame someone? Blame yourself for not being there. Blame your wife for not getting out faster. Blame God if you still believe in that nonsense. But don't pretend this is about justice. You're just a man who wants revenge." "Maybe, but I'm a man who'll get it." Ethan fired. The shot caught Silas in the shoulder, spun him sideways. Not a killing shot, deliberate. He wanted this to take time. Silas staggered but didn't go down. His hand went to his gun, cleared leather, even wounded. He fired back, the bullet whining past Ethan's ear close enough to feel the wind of its passage. 4 rounds left. Ethan moved, scrambling down the slope as Silas fired again, chips of rock exploding where he'd been standing. The terrain gave him cover, irregular and broken, offering concealment at the cost of stable footing. They circled each other through the debris field, two wounded animals looking for advantage. Silas's shoulder bled freely now, leaving a trail in the snow. Ethan's ribs ached where he'd slammed into a rock during his descent. Neither spoke. The time for words had passed. Silas disappeared behind a section of the collapsed slope. Ethan tracked the blood trail, moving parallel, watching for ambush. The light was failing fast now, the brief winter day surrendering to darkness. Soon they'd be fighting blind. A sound to his left. Ethan spun, fired at movement. The shot sparked off stone. Silas's answering fire came from the right, a feint, drawing Ethan's attention while circling to better position. 3 rounds left. They were both bleeding now, both hurt, both running on fumes and fury. But Silas had training, experience, the cold calculation of a man who killed for money and slept fine afterward. While Ethan had rage and grief and 3 years of wishing he'd died with his family. Not an even match. But even matches were rare in the real world. Ethan caught sight of him crossing an open space, fired, missed. Silas dove behind cover, came up shooting. A bullet caught Ethan's left arm, tore through muscle, sent fire racing up to his shoulder. He bit back a scream, kept moving, returned fire. 2 rounds left. "You're done, Cole," Silas called from concealment. "Bleeding out, down to your last shots. This is where it ends." Ethan didn't answer, pressed his hand against the wound, felt warm blood pulse between his fingers. Not arterial, he'd live long enough to finish this. Maybe. He circled wide, using the failing light for cover, tracking Silas by sound and shadow. The man was good, but he was hurt, moving slower, breathing harder. The shoulder wound had taken more than he wanted to admit. They met at the bottom of the debris field where the slope flattened into the creek bed. 15 feet apart, both armed, both wounded, both absolutely certain this ended with one of them dead. "Could have been different," Silas said, his gun steady despite the blood soaking his coat. "You could have let it go. Found a new life somewhere else. Your family was already gone. Chasing me wouldn't bring them back." "No, but killing you might let me sleep." "You really think that? You think revenge cures grief?" "I think some men need killing, and you're at the top of that list." "Fair enough." Silas smiled, cold and empty. "At least you're honest about it. Most men dress murder up in righteous language, pretend they're serving some higher purpose. You just want blood. I can respect that. I don't want your respect." "Good, because you're not getting it." They fired simultaneously. Ethan felt the impact before he heard the shot, a hammer blow to his chest that lifted him off his feet and dropped him into the snow. His vision grayed at the edges. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except lie there watching the sky turn from amber to violet. Across the distance, Silas staggered. Ethan's last shot had caught him in the gut, the kind of wound that killed slow and painful. He took 2 steps toward Ethan, then his legs gave out. He sat down hard, both hands pressed to his stomach, blood welling between his fingers. "Damn," he said quietly. "Didn't expect that." Ethan tried to speak. Blood filled his mouth. He coughed, spraying red across white snow. His chest felt like someone had shoved a burning timber through it, which, he supposed, was close enough to what a bullet did. Silas crawled toward him, leaving a dark trail, got within arm's reach and stopped, breathing in wet gasps. They lay there, 2 dying men in the snow, and watched darkness come to the mountains. "Your family," Silas said after a while. "Last thing I saw before the fire took hold was a woman at the window, holding a little girl. She was trying to break the glass, kept hitting it, never broke through." Ethan closed his eyes, saw Emma's face, her mother's arms around her, both of them trying to escape a death he'd brought home with him. The image had haunted every night for 3 years. Now it had a witness. Now it was confirmed, real, undeniable. "Why tell me?" he managed. "Because you're dying, and it costs me nothing, and maybe part of me wants you to know what your choices bought." Silas coughed, blood on his lips. "I didn't want to kill them, didn't enjoy it, but I didn't lose sleep either. That's the difference between men like me and men like you. You think every death matters. I know most don't. They mattered to me. I know, that's why taking them from you worked. Ethan's hand found the revolver lying in the snow beside him. Empty. Useless. He let it fall. Somewhere far above, the first stars were appearing, cold and distant and indifferent to the small violence of men. "The papers," Silas said. "Woman and the girl. They get away?" "Yeah. Hale will find them. He's got reach, resources, time." "Maybe. Or maybe they make it. Maybe your boss hangs for what he's done. Won't bring your family back." "No, but it'll save someone else's." Silas laughed, the sound wet and choking. "Still a hero, even bleeding out in the snow. Still think you're saving people." "Someone has to." "Why? World's full of evil men doing terrible things. You kill one, 10 more take his place. What's the point?" Ethan thought about William Holloway, standing up to power knowing it would kill him. About Mara, trading her life for her daughter's future. About Lena, small and fierce, carrying proof of corruption through the wilderness because her father had taught her that truth mattered. "The point is trying," he said. "The point is standing up when everyone else looks away. The point is that maybe, somewhere, someone survives because you didn't." Philosophy from a dying man. How touching. Better than dying for nothing but money. Silas didn't answer. His breathing had gone shallow, irregular. Ethan watched him fade, watched the life drain from his eyes, watched the man who'd killed his family become just meat and blood and consequences in the snow. He died quietly, without drama, the way most men died when you got right down to it. Just a body that stopped working and a soul that probably wasn't worth the saving anyway. Ethan lay there, his own breathing growing harder, colder settling into his bones. He'd killed Silas Mercer, avenged his family, done the one thing he'd promised himself he'd do before he died. It felt empty, hollow, like drinking seawater and calling it satisfaction. Above him the stars multiplied, cold points of light that had watched countless men die and would watch countless more. The universe didn't care. God, if he existed, had stopped listening years ago. Justice was what you made it, and revenge was just violence in fancy clothes. But maybe it had been enough. Maybe Mara and Lena would make it to Helena. Maybe the documents would matter. Maybe Judge Hale would hang and the people he'd stolen from would get their land back and the whole corrupt structure would come tumbling down. Maybe. Ethan closed his eyes, felt the cold take him, and stopped fighting. He woke to firelight and pain. For a confused moment, he thought he was in hell, which would have been fair given the things he'd done. But hell probably didn't include warm blankets, and it definitely didn't include the weathered face of an old man leaning over him with a whiskey bottle. "Easy now," the man said. "You've been shot, chest and arm, lost a lot of blood. Thought you were dead when I found you." Ethan tried to speak. His throat felt like sandpaper. The old man held the bottle to his lips. Whiskey burned down his throat, bringing tears and clarity. He was in a small cabin, rough timber walls, a fire crackling in a stone hearth. Outside the single window, darkness pressed close. "How long?" Ethan managed. "Found you yesterday evening. Been unconscious ever since. I'm Ben Carver, trapper. Got a line of cabins through these mountains. This one's my winter shelter." He pulled back the blanket, checked bandages wrapped around Ethan's chest. "Bullet missed your heart by maybe 2 inches, went clean through. You're lucky." "Don't feel lucky." "Lucky's relative. There's a dead man 50 yards from where I found you. He wasn't lucky at all." Silas, gone, dead. Really dead this time, not just dying in Ethan's memory. "There were 2 others with him," Ethan said. "His men. Found them too. Rockslide got them. Buried under about 10 tons of mountain. Nothing to do there but leave them for spring thaw." Ben sat back, studying Ethan with pale blue eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by violence. "You want to tell me what happened, or should I mind my business?" "You pull me out of the snow, you've earned the story." So Ethan told him. Not everything. Some things you kept private even when dying seemed imminent. But enough. The Holloways. The well. The murder and theft and systematic corruption. Silas Mercer and Judge Hale. The documents that might bring justice if they reached the right hands. Ben listened without interruption, occasionally refilling Ethan's whiskey, tending the fire when it burned low. When the story finished, he sat quiet for a long moment. This woman and her girl, he finally said. They headed for Helena? That was the plan. If they made it, if the fever didn't kill her first. Helena's 3 days hard riding for a healthy man. Lot longer for someone sick, and there's weather coming. Can feel it in my bones. Ben stood, crossed to the window. Storm'll hit tomorrow, maybe the day after. They get caught in it without shelter. They're done. Can't help them. Can barely help myself. No. But I know these mountains, know where someone running would go, know which game trails stay passable in winter and which ones kill you. He turned back to Ethan. I could look for them, bring them here if I find them, wait out the storm together. Why would you do that? Because I spent 20 years not giving a damn about anyone but myself, built up a nice quiet life where other people's problems stayed other people's problems. And you know what? It's boring and lonely. And when I die, which won't be long now, nobody'll remember I existed. He smiled, crooked and genuine. Might be nice to do something that matters before the end. Ethan wanted to argue, to say the old man didn't owe him anything, that risking his life for strangers was foolish and unnecessary. But the words wouldn't come, because he understood exactly what Ben meant, understood the weight of an empty life, the need to matter even once, even briefly, before darkness took you. They'll be heading east, Ethan said, trying to reach the territorial road. Woman sick, bad fever, girls 8, dark hair, carrying documents wrapped in oilcloth. They've got my mare, dun-colored, white blaze on her forehead. That's enough to work with. Ben gathered supplies, rope, blankets, dried meat, a tin of matches. You stay here, keep the fire going. There's food in the chest, water in the barrel. Don't die while I'm gone. I hate wasting effort on corpses. Ben, the old man paused at the door. Thank you, Ethan said. Thank me when I come back with them alive. If I come back with bodies, you can curse my name instead. He left, closing the door behind him, footsteps crunching away through snow. Ethan lay there listening to silence, feeling pain throb through his chest and arm, wondering if this was how stories ended, with half measures and hope, and the desperate trust that strangers would be better than circumstances suggested they should be. He slept, woke, slept again. Time passed in fragments broken by fever and pain. Sometimes he dreamed about Emma and Sarah, saw them at the window, beating against glass that wouldn't break. Sometimes he dreamed about Silas, dying in the snow, laughing at the futility of everything. Sometimes he dreamed about Lena, alone in the wilderness, her mother's body cooling beside her, documents scattered across frozen ground. He woke to dawn light and silence. The fire had burned down to coals. His chest felt like someone was standing on it. He forced himself upright, added wood to the fire, drank water that tasted of copper and bark. Outside the window, fresh snow was falling, heavy, thick, the kind that buried trails and killed unprepared travelers, the kind that made 3 days into 3 weeks if you were lucky, and 3 graves if you weren't. Ben had been gone a full day now, maybe more. Ethan had lost track of time somewhere between waking and sleeping and bleeding. The old man could be dead, frozen in some ravine, another casualty of other people's wars. Or he could be searching still, following trails that led nowhere, looking for people who'd already died. Or he could be bringing them home. Ethan stood, ignoring the way the room tilted and spun. He found his gun belt hanging on a peg, checked the revolvers, one empty, one with 4 rounds remaining. Found his coat, torn and bloody but still functional. Found his boots, stiff with dried blood. He was pulling them on when the door opened. Ben came through first, snow-covered and exhausted. Behind him, wrapped in blankets and barely standing, Mara Holloway leaned against the doorframe. And behind her, holding the reins of a dun mare with a white blaze, Lena stared at Ethan with eyes that held relief and grief, and the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much weight for too long. Found them about 10 miles northeast, Ben said, helping Mara to the bed Ethan had just vacated. Holed up in a hollow tree, trying to wait out the snow. Another day and they wouldn't have made it. Lena stood in the doorway, not moving, just looking at Ethan like she couldn't quite believe he was real. You're alive, she said finally. Seems that way. Silas? Dead, along with his men. It's finished. She nodded slowly, processing. Then she crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and held on like she was drowning and he was driftwood. He stood there awkwardly, one hand eventually coming to rest on her dark hair, feeling her shoulders shake with silent sobs. "It's okay," he said, the words inadequate and hollow. "You're safe now." "Mama's dying," Lena whispered against his coat. "She won't say it, but I know. She's getting worse." Ethan looked over her head at Mara, saw Ben examining her with the careful attention of someone who'd seen death before and recognized its approach. The old man met his eyes, gave a small shake of his head. "Not long now." "We need to get her to Helena," Ethan said, "to a real doctor." "She won't make it," Ben said quietly. "Lungs are filling. Fever's too high. Moving her would just make it faster." "Then what do? We make her comfortable. We let her daughter say goodbye. We honor what she's done by making sure it meant something." Ben pulled the oilcloth bundle from inside his coat, held it up. "These papers, they really worth dying for?" William Holloway thought so. Mara traded her life to keep them safe. "Yeah, they're worth it." "Then I'll take them to Helena, soon as the storm clears. I know Marshal Davies. Good man. Honest. He'll listen." Ben set the documents on the table. "You stay here with them. Keep the girl safe. Keep her mother comfortable. I'll handle the rest." "You don't have to do this." "I know. That's why I'm doing it." Ben smiled, tired and genuine. "Besides, someone needs to see this through to the end. Might as well be someone with nothing left to lose." The storm lasted 3 days. They took turns sitting with Mara, who faded in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in fever dreams where her husband still lived, and the well held only water. Lena stayed close, holding her mother's hand, telling her about Aunt Sarah and St. Louis and all the things they'd do when she got better. Lies told with love, the kindest kind. On the second day, Mara rallied briefly, lucid and clear-eyed. She called Lena to her, whispered things Ethan couldn't hear, mother to daughter, last words and final promises. When she finished, she looked at Ethan. "You got the papers safe?" she asked. "Safe. Ben's taking them to Helena when the weather clears." "Good. William would be glad." She coughed, a wet rattling sound. "Take care of her, please. She's all that's left." "I will. Don't let her grow up angry. Don't let what happened make her hard. She's got too much of her father in her for that. Too much goodness." "I'll try." "Trying's all anyone can do." Her eyes closed. "I'm tired, Ethan. So tired." "Then rest." "Will it matter? What we did? Will any of it change anything?" He thought about Silas dead in the snow, about Judge Hale, still free, still powerful, about all the corruption and theft and systematic evil that one brave man's investigation might expose, about the long, slow work of justice and how often it failed. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but it'll matter to the people who get their land back. It'll matter to the families who don't lose their fathers to convenient accidents. It'll matter to Lena when she's grown and understands what you sacrificed." That's enough then. That has to be enough. She died that night, quietly, while Lena slept against her shoulder. Ethan was there, watching, and he saw the moment when breathing stopped, and the woman who'd stared down Silas Mercer with a shotgun in fever became just a body that had once held someone fierce and brave and good. He didn't wake Lena. Let her have one more night of sleep where her mother was still alive, still warm, still present in the way that mattered. Morning would come soon enough. Grief would last forever. Ben helped him build a cairn outside the cabin the next day. The ground was too frozen for a proper grave, so they stacked stones over her body, piling rocks until no animal could disturb her rest. Lena watched, dry-eyed and silent, and when they finished, she placed her father's revolver on top of the cairn. "She should have something of his with her," the girl said. "So she's not alone." They stood in the snow, and Ethan tried to think of something meaningful to say. Some words that would make loss hurt less, that would give meaning to sacrifice. But everything sounded hollow in his head, cheap platitudes that insulted the dead and comforted no one. So he just said, "She loved you very much, and she died making sure you'd have a future. That's more than most people get." Lena nodded, then she turned and walked back to the cabin, small and straight-backed, and carrying a weight no child should have to bear. Ben left the next morning, the documents wrapped in new oilcloth, tucked safely in his pack. He shook Ethan's hand, nodded to Lena, and headed east through snow that was already starting to melt. "How long until we know if it worked?" Lena asked, watching him disappear into the tree line. "Weeks, maybe months. Law moves slow. But it moves, sometimes, when good people push it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What happens to me now?" "Ben gave me directions to the nearest settlement. 3 days' walk when I'm healed enough to travel. From there, we can get you on a stage to St. Louis. Your aunt will take you in." "And you?" Good question. Ethan had spent 3 years running from ghosts, and now the biggest ghost was finally laid to rest. Silas was dead. His family was avenged. The rage that had kept him moving was guttering out, leaving behind something he didn't quite recognize. Purpose, maybe. Or at least the absence of its opposite. "I'll make sure you get there safe," he said. "After that, I don't know." Lena looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. "You could stay in St. Louis. Aunt Sarah has a big house. She'd let you." "That's generous, but I'm not family." "You're the reason I'm alive. That makes you something." They left Ben's cabin 6 days later, when Ethan could walk without feeling like his chest was tearing open, and the mountain passes had cleared enough to risk travel. The mare carried their meager supplies and occasionally Lena when exhaustion made her stumble. Ethan walked, his rifle slung across his back, scanning the tree line from habit, even though Silas and his men were dead, and Judge Hale's reach didn't extend this far into the wilderness. Or so he hoped. The settlement Ben had described turned out to be a collection of rough buildings clustered around a trading post, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and names weren't required. They arrived on a gray afternoon with snow threatening, and the man behind the counter looked them over with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd seen everything twice. "Stage comes through every 8 days, he said when Ethan asked about transportation east. "Next one's due tomorrow if the weather holds. Runs to Fort Benton. Then you can catch a train south to Helena or east to wherever you're headed." "St. Louis," Lena said quietly. The man nodded. "Long trip for a little girl. You traveling alone?" "She's with me," Ethan said before Lena could answer. "I'm seeing her to family." "Fair enough. Cost you $8 for 2 seats. Pay now or pay the driver." "Makes no difference to me." Ethan counted out coins from the small leather pouch Mara had given him before she died. Her last money, saved for emergencies that had finally arrived. The transaction felt heavy with significance he couldn't quite name. They took a room above the trading post, 1 bed and a washstand and a window that looked out on nothing but snow and mountains. Lena sat on the bed, silent, while Ethan checked his weapons and tried not to think about what came next. "You're going to like your aunt," he said, because the quiet was becoming unbearable. "Your mother said she's kind, patient, good with children. Mama said a lot of things." Lena's voice was flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. "Said Papa would come home. Said we'd be fine. Said God watched over good people." "Your mother believed those things when she said them. Believing doesn't make them true." Ethan sat down in the room's single chair, suddenly aware of how young she was and how old she sounded. 8 years old, and she'd watched her father murdered, her mother die, and the town she'd grown up in turn its back on both. That kind of betrayal aged you in ways time alone couldn't measure. "No," he agreed. "Believing doesn't make things true, but it makes them possible. Your mother believed those documents would matter, believed getting you to safety was worth dying for. That belief is what kept her moving when her body wanted to quit. And now she's dead and we don't even know if any of it worked. We will. Ben will get the papers to Marshal Davies. The marshal will investigate. If the evidence is as solid as your father thought, Judge Hale will face trial. And if it's not, then we tried. Sometimes that's all you get." Lena pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. "I don't want to go to St. Louis. I don't want to live with an aunt I barely remember. I want my parents back. I want our farm. I want everything to be the way it was before Papa found those papers." "I know." "Do you? Do you really know what it's like to lose everything?" Ethan met her eyes, saw the challenge there, the need to not be alone in grief. "Yeah, I do. My wife and daughter died 3 years ago. House fire. I was away working, chasing the man who ended up killing your father. I came home to ashes and graves and the knowledge that I'd chosen a job over the people I loved. Lena's expression shifted, anger giving way to something softer. What were their names? Sarah and Emma. My wife was a school teacher. Emma was 9. She liked books and horses and had her mother's laugh. The words came easier than they had in years. Emma would have liked you. You've got her stubbornness. What happened to the man who killed them? He died 6 days ago in the snow. I made sure of it. Did it help, killing him? Ethan thought about Silas's last moments, the empty satisfaction of revenge, the way justice and vengeance had tasted the same going down but different in hindsight. It ended something, closed a door, but it didn't bring them back, didn't make the grief lighter, just made it different. So what do you do with the grief? You carry it. You wake up every morning and you carry it some more. And eventually, if you're lucky, it becomes part of you instead of the thing crushing you. You learn to live around it. I don't want to learn that. I know. But you will anyway. Because you're strong, like your mother, and stubborn like your father, and you've got too much life ahead of you to spend it buried in the past. He stood, crossed to the window. Outside, the first snowflakes were starting to fall. They died making sure you'd survive, Lena. Don't dishonor that by giving up. She was quiet for a long time. Then, will you write to me after you leave me with Aunt Sarah, so I know you're okay? The question caught him off guard. In 3 years, he'd deliberately cultivated isolation, moving through the world without connections or commitments. The idea of promising to write letters, to maintain contact, to let someone care whether he lived or died. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and being asked to jump. Yeah, he heard himself say, I'll write. Promise? Promise. She seemed to relax slightly, the rigid tension in her shoulders easing. Okay then. They ate a silent dinner in the Trading Post's small dining area, sharing a table with a pair of trappers who smelled like smoke and whiskey and didn't ask questions. Afterward, Lena fell asleep almost immediately, curled on her side facing the wall. Ethan sat in the chair watching her breathe, thinking about promises and futures and the strange weight of responsibility he'd somehow acquired. The stage arrived mid-morning, a mud-splattered coach pulled by 6 horses that looked as tired as Ethan felt. The driver was a grizzled man named Carson, who checked their tickets and gestured them aboard without ceremony. 2 other passengers were already inside. A woman in an expensive traveling dress who looked at Lena with vague disapproval, and a younger man in a suit who immediately buried himself in a newspaper. The journey to Fort Benton took 3 days of hard travel through mountain passes and along roads that barely deserved the name. They stopped at way stations where the horses were changed and passengers could stretch cramped legs and eat whatever questionable meal was being served. Ethan used these stops to check their surroundings, old instincts refusing to die just because Silas was dead. On the second day, while Lena slept against the coach wall and the other passengers dozed, Ethan found himself talking with Carson during a stop to repair a broken wheel. Girl's been through something, the driver observed, watching Lena through the coach window. Got that look. Seen it before on orphans and refugees. She lost her parents, recently. And you're taking her to family? Her aunt in St. Louis. Carson nodded, packing tobacco into his pipe. Kind of you. Not many men would take on that responsibility for someone else's child. Didn't feel like I had a choice. We always got choices. Question is whether we can live with ourselves after making them. He lit his pipe, drew deeply. You planning to stay? In St. Louis? Haven't decided. Man without plans is a man without purpose. That's dangerous. Leaves too much room for the past to catch up. Ethan glanced at him sharply. You speaking from experience? Spent 15 years running stages after my family died in a Cheyenne raid. Kept moving because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant remembering. Took me a long time to learn that remembering isn't the enemy. Forgetting is. The wheel was repaired. Carson stood, stretched, knocked ash from his pipe. Girl needs stability, needs someone who will be there when she wakes up scared in the night, needs to know she's not alone. You think about that before you leave her with an aunt she barely knows. They boarded again. The coach lurched into motion. Ethan sat watching the landscape roll past, thinking about stability and purpose, and the difference between running away and moving forward. Fort Benton revealed itself in stages as they descended from the mountains. First the smoke from chimneys, then the buildings themselves clustered along the Missouri River. Finally the streets crowded with freight wagons and riverboats, and the organized chaos of a town that served as gateway to the Northern Territories. They had 8 hours before the eastbound train departed. Ethan used the time to find a hotel with real beds and hot water, to buy Lena a new dress and coat that fit properly, to sit in a restaurant and watch her eat a full meal for the first time since her mother died. She was different here. In civilization. Quieter. More withdrawn. As if leaving the mountains behind had stripped away some essential part of her and left only the frightened child underneath. "You don't have to come with me," she said over dessert, apple pie that she picked at without enthusiasm. "I can travel alone. I'm not scared." "I know you're not scared. I'm still coming." "Why?" "You did what you promised, Mama. Got me away from Ridgeway. Kept me safe. The rest is just extra. Maybe I want to see it through to the end. Make sure you're actually settled before I leave. Or maybe you don't know what else to do with yourself." She looked up at him, her dark eyes too knowing. "Mama told me about men like you. Said sometimes people survive things that kill them inside, and they spend the rest of their lives looking for a reason to care again. Your mother was perceptive. She was right, wasn't she? You're lost, just like me." Ethan had no answer to that, because she was right, and they both knew it, and pretending otherwise would insult them both. They boarded the train as the sun was setting, golden light painting the river and the distant mountains in shades of amber and rose. The passenger car was half empty, allowing them seats by a window. Lena pressed her face to the glass, watching Fort Benton recede, watching the last sight of the mountains where her parents were buried disappear into distance and gathering dark. The train headed east through the night, wheels clacking on rails, steam whistle crying at crossings. Other passengers slept or read or played cards in the smoking car. Ethan sat awake, alert despite exhaustion, watching shadows and thinking about what waited in St. Louis. He'd sent a telegram from Fort Benton to Sarah Brennan, informing her of her sister's death and her niece's impending arrival. The response had come within hours, brief but clear. "We'll meet train. Room prepared. Thank you for bringing her home." Home. As if St. Louis could be home to a girl who'd spent her whole life in Montana Territory, who'd learned to pump water before she could read, who'd seen her father murdered and her mother die and her whole world collapse into blood and snow and desperate flight. But maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was just anywhere you were allowed to stop running. Somewhere past midnight, Lena stirred, half waking from troubled sleep. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice muzzy and small. "Are we safe now?" "Yeah, we're safe." "Promise?" "Promise." She fell back asleep against his shoulder. Ethan sat there, her weight warm and trusting against him, and felt something crack in his chest. Not breaking, opening, like a door he'd nailed shut 3 years ago, suddenly admitting light. The journey to St. Louis took 6 days of trains and transfers and hotel rooms that all looked the same. They traveled through landscape that changed from mountains to plains to rolling farmland, from wilderness to civilization, from the raw frontier to the settled east. With each mile, Lena seemed to withdraw further into herself, speaking less, eating less, watching the world pass with eyes that registered nothing. On the 4th day, Ethan found her crying in their hotel room, silent tears streaming down her face while she clutched the oilcloth bundle she'd carried from Ridgeway. He'd thought Ben had taken all the documents, but apparently she'd kept something back, a letter in her father's handwriting addressed to her, written the week before he died. "He knew," she said when Ethan asked. "He knew what might happen. Knew they might kill him. He wrote this just in case." "What does it say?" She handed it over. The writing was neat, precise, the words carefully chosen. "My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me and your mother is giving you this letter like I asked her to. I want you to know that everything I did because I believe some things are worth standing up for, even when standing up is dangerous. I found evidence of terrible wrongs being done to good people. I could have stayed quiet, could have burned the papers, and gone on with our life. But then I wouldn't have been the man I wanted you to remember. I wouldn't have been the father you deserved. So I'm standing up. And if it cost me my life, then at least I died trying to make the world a little bit better than I found it. You'll understand when you're older that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same. Sometimes you have to choose. I chose you, Lena. I chose the world you'll grow up in. I chose to believe that truth matters and justice is possible, and one person can make a difference. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever let anyone tell you that staying silent is safer than speaking up. Your mother and I love you more than words can say. Be brave, be kind, be the person we know you can be. Always, Papa. Ethan read it twice, feeling the weight of words written by a man who'd known he might die but stood up anyway. William Holloway had been a clerk, a farmer, a nobody from a nowhere town, but he'd found evidence of corruption and refused to look away, and that refusal had cost him everything. He was a good man, Ethan said finally, handing the letter back. Good men shouldn't die. Lena folded the letter carefully, tucked it back in the bundle. What's the point of being good if it just gets you killed? The point is that other people see it. They see someone stand up, and it makes it easier for them to stand up next time. Your father's courage gave your mother courage. Their courage gave me a reason to stop running. Maybe my being here gives you something to hold on to. It spreads, Lena, like ripples in water. Mama used to say something like that. Said goodness compounds. She was right. Then where's our compound? Where's the good that balances out Papa dying and Mama dying and me losing everything? Maybe it's not here yet. Maybe it takes time. Maybe it's in Helena right now, where Ben is showing those documents to Marshal Davies. Maybe it's in the people who'll get their land back when Judge Hale hangs. Maybe it's 60 years from now when you're an old woman telling your grandchildren about the time your father stood up to corruption and changed everything. That's a lot of maybes. Yeah, but maybes are all we get. You can spend your life waiting for certainties, or you can take a chance on maybes and hope they add up to something. She looked at him for a long moment, then carefully put the letter away. You sound like Papa. I'll take that as a compliment. They reached St. Louis on a cold February morning. The city spread along the Mississippi River like something from a different world. Brick buildings 3 and 4 stories tall. Cobblestone streets crowded with carriages and vendors. Church spires reaching toward a sky thick with coal smoke. The noise was overwhelming after weeks in the wilderness. Voices, wheels, steamboat whistles, construction, commerce, life, happening at a volume and pace that made Ridgeway seem like a quiet dream. Sarah Brennan met them at the station, a woman in her mid-30s with Mara's dark hair and eyes, but none of the hardness that frontier life had carved into her sister. She wore a burgundy traveling suit and had the comfortable prosperity of someone who'd married well and lived soft. When she saw Lena stepping off the train, her face crumpled with grief and relief in equal measure. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, dropping to her knees right there on the platform, pulling Lena into a fierce embrace. "Oh, my dear girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry." Lena stood rigid in her aunt's arms, not quite returning the embrace, not quite pulling away. Over the girl's head, Sarah met Ethan's eyes. "Mr. Cole? I'm Sarah Brennan. Thank you for bringing her safely. I can't imagine what you've been through." "Just did what needed doing, ma'am." "Come to the house, please. You must be exhausted. We have a guest room prepared. You'll stay for dinner at least." It wasn't really a question. Sarah Brennan had the polite insistence of someone used to getting her way through kindness rather than force. Ethan found himself agreeing, following her to an elegant carriage driven by a man in livery who touched his cap and called her Mrs. Brennan like she was royalty. The house was in a neighborhood of tall trees and mansions set back from the street, 3 stories of red brick with white columns and windows that gleamed in the weak winter sun. A maid opened the door. A butler took their coats. Everything smelled like beeswax and money and the kind of security that came from never having to wonder where your next meal was coming from. Lena looked around with wide eyes, taking in the chandelier, the carpeted stairs, the oil paintings and gilded frames. "This is where you live?" she asked her aunt. "This is where we live now, darling. You and me both. Your uncle passed away last year. It's just us and the staff. Plenty of room for you to grow." Sarah touched her niece's hair gently. "You must be hungry. Mrs. Patterson has lunch ready. Why don't we eat, and then I'll show you your room?" They ate in a dining room that could have fit the Holloway farmhouse twice over. The food was rich, complex, served on china so delicate Ethan was afraid to touch it. Sarah kept up a gentle stream of conversation, asking Lena about her journey, complimenting her dress, never quite asking the hard questions about how her sister died or what the girl had witnessed. Lena ate mechanically, answering in monosyllables, her eyes fixed on her plate. After lunch, Sarah showed them upstairs. Lena's room was larger than the entire cabin where her mother had died, furnished with a four-poster bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe full of dresses that had belonged to Sarah's daughter before she'd married and moved to Boston. Everything was pink and white and carefully chosen to delight a little girl. Lena stood in the doorway, not entering, her face carefully blank. "Is it too much?" Sarah asked, suddenly uncertain. "I can change it, make it simpler. I just wanted you to feel welcome." "It's fine," Lena said. "Thank you." But her voice said it was anything but fine, said it was overwhelming and foreign, and nothing like the small bedroom in Montana where she'd slept safe beneath quilts her mother had sewn. Sarah seemed to sense the problem. "Why don't you rest? Mr. Cole, if you'll come with me, I'll show you the guest room. We can talk while Lena settles in." The guest room was down the hall, smaller but still luxurious by any reasonable standard. Sarah closed the door behind them and her careful composure finally cracked. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me everything. Your telegram said Mara died of fever, but I know my sister. She was strong as iron. What really happened?" So Ethan told her. All of it this time. William's investigation, the murder, the town's betrayal. Mara's desperate fight to keep her daughter alive, the documents that might bring justice, the flight through the mountains and the fever that killed her despite everything. He didn't spare details or soften edges. Sarah deserved the truth. When he finished, she was crying, silent tears tracking through expensive face powder. "I should have come for her, after William died. Should have insisted she come here, bring Lena, leave that awful place. She wouldn't have left. The documents were there, the fight was there. Your sister was stubborn." "She was brave." Sarah wiped her eyes. "And I was here living in comfort while she died in the wilderness. How am I supposed to live with that?" "The same way anyone lives with survivor's guilt. You take care of her daughter. You give Lena the life Mara wanted for her. You make the sacrifice mean something." Sarah nodded, composing herself. "How long can you stay? Lena seems attached to you. Might help the transition if you're here a few days." "I can stay as long as needed." "And after? What will you do?" Ethan had been avoiding that question for 6 days. "I don't know. Head west maybe. Find work. Keep moving." "Or you could stay in St. Louis. There's work for capable men. My late husband had business interests that need managing. I could use someone trustworthy." "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I'm not cut out for business." "Then what are you cut out for?" Good question. For 3 years, he'd been cut out for nothing except revenge and whiskey and the kind of isolation that kept grief at arm's length. But revenge was finished and isolation suddenly felt less like protection and more like cowardice. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. Sarah studied him with eyes that reminded him painfully of Mara. "You care about her, Lena. I can see it. I care about keeping her safe, making sure she's okay. That's what family does. I'm not family. Family is who shows up when it matters. Blood's just biology." She moved to the window, looked out at the manicured lawn. "Stay a week, see how she settles, then decide. You don't have to commit to anything, just don't run off before she's ready to let you go." A week became 2. Ethan stayed in the guest room, took his meals with Sarah and Lena, tried to stay out of the way while the girl adjusted to her new life. It wasn't going well. Lena was polite but distant, going through the motions of living without actually engaging with anything. She attended the lessons Sarah arranged with a tutor, but retained nothing. She wore the dresses her aunt bought, but looked uncomfortable in them. She slept poorly, waking with nightmares she wouldn't discuss. The only time she seemed even remotely present was when Ethan was there. She'd sit with him in the library while he read newspapers, walk with him in the garden when weather allowed, ask him questions about Montana and the wilderness and whether he thought Ben had made it to Helena yet. "What if the papers weren't enough?" she asked one afternoon 3 weeks after their arrival. They were in the library, rain drumming against the windows. "What if Judge Hale has friends who protect him?" "Then we tried. That's all anyone can do. Papa died for trying. Mama died for trying. Trying doesn't seem to work out well. Your parents died making sure you survived. That worked out fine. She was quiet, running her finger along the spine of a book she wasn't reading. Aunt Sarah wants me to call her mother. Says it'll help me adjust. What do you think? I think I already had a mother. I think calling someone else mother feels like erasing her. Tell your aunt that. She'll understand. Will she? Or will she think I'm being difficult? She'll think you're being honest. That's different from difficult. Lena set the book down. Are you going to leave? Eventually. When? When you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Ethan looked at her, this small, fierce girl who'd lost everything and kept walking, and felt the last of his isolation crack completely open. Then I guess I stay. The telegram arrived 6 weeks after they'd reached St. Louis. It was addressed to Ethan Cole, care of the Brennan residence, and it came from Helena. Judge Rourke Hale, arrested. Stop Silas Mercer, confirmed dead, stop. Multiple indictments handed down, stop. Land titles being restored, stop. Holloway name cleared, stop. Trial, set for April. Stop your testimony needed, stop. Davies. Ethan read it 3 times, then handed it to Sarah. She read it once and started crying again. It worked, she said. Everything they did, everything they sacrificed, it worked. Lena was in the music room with her tutor. Ethan found her at the piano, struggling through a simple piece, frustration written clear across her young face. When she saw him in the doorway, she stopped playing. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He crossed to her, crouched down so they were eye level. Something's right. Very right. The documents your father found, the ones your mother died protecting, they worked. Judge Hale's been arrested. The people he stole from are getting their land back. Your parents' names have been cleared. Lena stared at him, processing. They're going to trial? In April. Marshal Davies wants me to testify. Tell the court what happened. I want to testify too. I saw him, Silas Mercer. I saw him push Papa into the well. I can tell them. Make sure they know. Her voice was fierce, determined. Papa and Mama didn't die for nothing. I want to be there when everyone knows it. Sarah appeared in the doorway, having followed Ethan. Sweetheart, a trial is no place for a child. The things they'll ask about, the details. I already lived the details. I already know what happened. Hiding from it won't change anything. Lena looked between them. Please, let me finish what they started. Ethan met Sarah's eyes over the girl's head, saw the same stubbornness in her that had driven her sister, the same refusal to look away from hard truths. It's her choice, he said quietly. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then, we'll go together, all 3 of us. April's 2 months away. We'll prepare. We'll make sure you're ready. But Lena, if it becomes too much, it won't. If it does, you tell me. Promise. I promise. They spent the next 2 months preparing. Ethan wrote detailed accounts of everything that had happened. Sarah hired lawyers to help Lena understand what testimony meant, what questions she'd face, how to handle cross-examination. The girl approached it like studying for an exam, memorizing details, practicing answers, transforming grief and trauma into something that could be presented in a courtroom. In March, a second telegram arrived, this one from Ben Carver. Hale trying to delay trial. Stop lawyers filing motions, stop. Davies holding firm, stop. Multiple witnesses coming forward. Stop, your presence will seal conviction, stop. Bring the girl if she's willing. Stop, her testimony matters, stop, BC. They departed for Helena on the 1st of April, traveling by train back across the landscape Ethan and Lena had crossed in the opposite direction 2 months earlier. Sarah came with them, protective and nervous, making sure Lena ate properly and slept enough and didn't spend too much time dwelling on what was coming. But Lena wasn't dwelling. If anything, she seemed more present than she'd been since her mother died, focused and determined, preparing for what felt like a final test. Helena had grown since Ethan's last visit years ago. The territorial capital sprawled along Last Chance Gulch, mining wealth evident in the ornate buildings and bustling streets. Marshal Davies met their train personally, a lean man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by human cruelty. "Cole," he said, shaking Ethan's hand. "Good to see you alive. Heard you'd gone looking for Silas Mercer. Figured you'd end up dead." "Nearly did. Got lucky." Davies turned to Lena, crouched down the way Ethan had in the music room. "You must be Lena Holloway. I've heard a lot about you. About your father, too. He was a brave man." "I know," Lena said quietly. "That's why I'm here. Trial starts tomorrow. Judge Carson presiding. He's fair, doesn't take bribes, won't be intimidated by Hale's lawyers. You'll testify day after tomorrow, probably. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir." "Good girl." He stood, addressed Sarah and Ethan. "I've arranged rooms at the International Hotel. Comfortable, secure. There have been some threats. Hale still has friends who'd rather this trial didn't happen. But I've got men watching. You'll be safe." The trial opened on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom packed with spectators. News of Judge Hale's arrest had spread across 3 territories, bringing journalists, lawyers, and citizens who'd suffered under his corruption. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the anticipation of seeing power finally held accountable. Hale sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed, his face carefully neutral. He looked like any respectable judge, dignified, intelligent, trustworthy, which was exactly the problem. Men like him wrapped cruelty in respectability, stole in broad daylight, and murdered with legal language. The prosecution opened with a detailed accounting of the evidence William Holloway had compiled. Forged deeds, fraudulent land transfers, bank records showing payments to Silas Mercer for enforcement services, witness testimony from families who'd lost property to convenient accidents and legal maneuvering. Ethan testified on the 3rd day, describing the Holloway farm, Mara's dying words, the flight through the mountains, the confrontation with Silas. The defense tried to discredit him, accused him of being a drunk, a drifter, a man with a grudge against authority. But the facts didn't care about character assassination. The documents spoke for themselves. Lena took the stand on the 4th day. She wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had chosen, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. Her hands were folded in her lap as she settled into the witness chair, and when the bailiff asked her to state her name for the record, her voice carried clear across the hushed courtroom. Lena Marie Holloway. The prosecutor was a woman named Margaret Chen, sharp-eyed and methodical, who'd built her career prosecuting corruption in the territories. She approached Lena with the careful gentleness of someone who understood exactly what she was asking this child to relive. "Miss Holloway, I know this is difficult. We'll take it slowly. Can you tell the court about your father, William Holloway?" Lena's hands tightened slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "He was a clerk at the Ridgeway courthouse. He kept records, filed documents, made sure everything was organized properly. He was good at his job, careful. He noticed things." "What kind of things did he notice?" "Discrepancies. That's what he called them. Documents that didn't match, deeds that had been changed, dates that were wrong. At first he thought it was just mistakes, people being careless, but then he started finding patterns." "What did he do when he found these patterns?" "He made copies, compared them to the originals, checked bank records against property transfers. He worked at night after everyone else went home, documenting everything. It took him almost a year." Chen nodded, her expression encouraging. "Did he tell you what he found?" "Some of it. He said powerful people were stealing from families who couldn't fight back. Said they'd been doing it for 20 years, said it was wrong and someone needed to stop it." "Did he know it was dangerous, this investigation?" "Yes, ma'am. Mama didn't want him to continue. They argued about it sometimes, but Papa said if good people stayed silent when they saw evil, then evil won. He said someone had to stand up." "Tell the court what happened on October 14th of last year." Lena took a breath, her eyes finding Ethan in the gallery. He nodded slightly. She looked back at the prosecutor. "Papa had been going to the well every morning to get water before work. It was part of his routine. That morning I went with him because I wanted to show him a bird's nest I'd found. We got to the well and there was a man there, Silas Mercer. I recognized him because he worked for Judge Hale, did errands and enforcements and things." "What happened when you arrived at the well?" "They were arguing. Papa had documents in his hand. He was telling Mr. Mercer that he had proof, that he was taking it to the territorial governor, that Judge Hale was going to answer for what he'd done. Mr. Mercer said Papa was making a mistake, said there was still time to walk away, forget what he'd found, keep his family safe. What did your father say? He said his family would never be safe as long as men like Judge Hale could steal and lie and get away with it. He said the documents were already copied and hidden where Silas couldn't find them. He said it was too late to stop what was coming. And then, Lena's voice dropped slightly, but didn't waver. Mr. Mercer grabbed Papa. They struggled. Papa dropped the documents and they scattered across the snow. Mercer pushed him toward the well, telling him that accidents happen all the time in small towns, that people fall, that no one would question it. Papa tried to fight back, but Mr. Mercer was bigger, stronger. He shoved Papa hard and Papa fell backward into the well. I heard him hit the water, heard him call for help. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the journalists had stopped writing. What did you do? Chen asked gently. I ran to the well, tried to reach him, but I was too small, couldn't lean far enough without falling in myself. I screamed for help. Mr. Mercer just stood there watching. Then he picked up the documents Papa had dropped, looked at me, and said that if I told anyone what I saw, my mother would have the same kind of accident. He said I should think carefully about what I remembered. Did anyone come to help? The Wilson brothers were loading their wagon nearby. Mrs. Garrett was in the mercantile. I could see people in windows. I screamed and screamed, but no one came. They all looked away. How long did your father survive in the well? I don't know exactly. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. He kept calling for help at first. Then he just called for Mama. Then he stopped calling at all. Tears were streaming down Lena's face now, but her voice remained clear. Mr. Mercer left. I stayed there until Papa stopped making sounds. Then I ran home and told Mama what happened. What did your mother do? She grabbed her shotgun and ran to the well, pulled Papa out. He was already dead. She held him and I cried, and no one came. Not the marshal, not the doctor, not even Reverend Shaw. The town just went on like nothing had happened. Chen let the silence stretch, let the jury absorb what they'd heard. Then quietly, what happened after your father's death? Mama reported it, told the marshal what I'd seen. He wrote it down and said he'd investigate. But nothing happened. Judge Hale ruled it an accidental death. The town stopped talking to us. The mercantile wouldn't sell us food. The doctor wouldn't come when Mama got sick. People crossed the street to avoid us. It was like we'd become ghosts. Why do you think the town treated you this way? Because we told the truth. Because Papa had found proof of what Judge Hale had done, and everyone was too scared to stand up with us. Or they were part of it. Or they just didn't care enough about justice to risk anything. Miss Holloway, do you see Judge Rourke Hale in this courtroom? Yes, ma'am. Can you point to him? Lena raised her hand, pointed directly at the defense table. He's sitting right there. The man in the gray suit who's been staring at me since I started talking. Judge Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. The look of a man realizing his careful empire was crumbling. Chen approached the bench, retrieved a bundle of documents. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the papers recovered from the Holloway well, cataloged and verified by Marshal Davies. These are the documents William Holloway died protecting. She handed copies to the jury, to the defense, to the judge. The original documents were presented to Lena. Miss Holloway, do you recognize these papers? Lena looked at them, touched the oilcloth wrapping that had traveled through snow and wilderness and desperate flight. Yes, ma'am. These are what Papa found. What Mama died making sure reached people who'd listen. Thank you, Miss Holloway. No further questions. The defense attorney was a man named Rawlings, expensive suit and practiced sincerity, who'd made a career defending the indefensible. He approached Lena with calculated sympathy. Miss Holloway, first let me say how sorry I am for your losses. No child should experience what you've been through. Lena just looked at him, waiting. You were 8 years old when your father died. Is that correct? Yes, sir. 8 years old and you witnessed a traumatic event. Your father dying in terrible circumstances. That must have been confusing, frightening. It wasn't confusing. I saw exactly what happened. But you were very young. And children sometimes misremember things, especially traumatic things. Sometimes they see what they expect to see or what they've been told happened rather than what actually occurred. I know what I saw. You say Silas Mercer pushed your father, but isn't it possible they were simply struggling and your father lost his balance? That it was as originally ruled an unfortunate accident? No, sir. Mr. Mercer deliberately pushed him. I was standing right there. But you also testified you were trying to show your father a bird's nest. So you were distracted, looking at something else, perhaps not paying full attention to what the adults were doing. I saw the whole thing. From the moment Mr. Mercer grabbed Papa to the moment he stopped breathing in the well, I saw all of it. Rawlings shifted tactics. Your mother was very sick in the weeks before she died, correct? Feverish, sometimes confused? Her body was sick, her mind was fine. But fever can cause delirium, can make people believe things that aren't true, say things that aren't accurate. Isn't it possible your mother's fear and illness caused her to interpret your father's accidental death as something more sinister? Mama didn't interpret anything. I told her what I saw. She believed me because I was telling the truth. You're very certain of that? Yes, sir. Certain enough to come into this courtroom and accuse a respected territorial judge of conspiracy to murder based on what you as an 8-year-old child believe you witnessed. Chen was on her feet. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Rawlings, ask your questions without the editorial commentary. Rawlings nodded, turned back to Lena. Miss Holloway, you're currently living in St. Louis with your aunt, in quite comfortable circumstances, are you not? I live with Aunt Sarah, yes, sir. Much more comfortable than your family's farm in Ridgeway. A mansion, I believe. Servants, fine clothes, every advantage. I'd trade it all to have my parents back. Of course, but my point is you have a vested interest in this trial's outcome. If Judge Hale is convicted, the story of how you survived becomes quite dramatic, perhaps even profitable. Book deals, speaking engagements, the sympathy of strangers. I don't want sympathy. I want justice. Or perhaps you want revenge. Perhaps you're a little girl who lost her parents and needs someone to blame. So you've convinced yourself that what was truly an accident was actually murder. Lena's hands were white-knuckled on the arms of the witness chair, but her voice stayed level. I don't need to convince myself of anything. I was there. I saw it. And no amount of expensive lawyers or clever questions will change what happened. But you can't actually prove your father was murdered, can you? You have no physical evidence, no witnesses besides yourself, just the word of a traumatized child against a man who served this territory with distinction for 20 years. I have the documents Papa died protecting. I have the pattern of theft and corruption he uncovered. I have the fact that after he found that evidence, he ended up dead, and Judge Hale ruled it an accident without proper investigation. I have Silas Mercer hunting us, trying to destroy those documents, willing to kill again to keep them hidden. If that's not proof, then proof doesn't exist. Rawlings opened his mouth, closed it, tried another angle. Mr. Cole, the man who brought you to St. Louis, he killed Silas Mercer, correct? Silas Mercer tried to kill us. Mr. Cole defended us. So we only have Mr. Cole's word about what Silas Mercer said or did in those final days. A convenient story from a man with a personal grudge against the deceased. Mr. Cole saved my life, my mother's life. He risked everything to make sure Papa's work meant something. The only thing convenient about this story is how it helps powerful men avoid consequences. Your Honor, the witness is being argumentative. Judge Carson looked at Lena over his spectacles. The witness is answering your questions, Mr. Rawlings. If you don't like the answers, perhaps ask better questions. A ripple of laughter ran through the gallery. Rawlings' face reddened slightly. No further questions, he said stiffly. Chen stood. Redirect, Your Honor. Miss Holloway, in your own words, why are you here today? Lena looked out at the courtroom, at Ethan and Sarah, at Marshall Davies and Ben Carver, who'd traveled from his mountain cabin to testify, at the journalists and citizens who'd packed the gallery. She looked at Judge Hale, met his eyes directly. I'm here because my father believed truth mattered more than safety, because my mother believed getting justice was worth dying for, because Mr. Cole believed standing up to evil was possible even when it seemed hopeless. They all sacrificed everything so I could sit in this chair and tell you what happened. so the people Judge Hale stole from could get their land back. So children growing up in this territory wouldn't have to be afraid of speaking truth to power. I'm here because someone has to finish what Papa started. And if it has to be me, then it's me. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Carson banged his gavel, but didn't seem particularly interested in stopping it. When order finally restored itself, he dismissed Lena from the stand. She walked back to her seat between Sarah and Ethan, her legs shaking now that it was over. Sarah pulled her close. Ethan put his hand on her shoulder, felt her trembling, felt the cost of courage burning through her small frame. "You did good," he said quietly. "Better than good. You were perfect." "I was so scared," she whispered. "Brave and scared aren't opposites. Your father would be proud." The trial continued for 3 more days. Additional witnesses testified to Judge Hale's corruption, to Silas Mercer's enforcement methods, to the systematic theft that had transferred millions of dollars in property over 2 decades. Financial experts walked the jury through the forged documents, the fraudulent transfers, the paper trail William Holloway had so carefully documented. The defense tried to discredit every witness, questioned every document, painted Hale as a dedicated public servant targeted by malcontents and troublemakers. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Lena's testimony had been devastating. An 8-year-old child describing her father's murder with perfect clarity, facing down aggressive cross-examination without flinching, it had shifted something in the courtroom's atmosphere, transformed abstract corruption into human cost. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of conspiracy to defraud, guilty of theft, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Hale showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his hands, resting on the defense table, were shaking. Carson sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison, with recommendations that he never hold public office again. Hale's co-conspirators, the ones who hadn't fled or died, received similar sentences. The stolen properties were ordered returned to their rightful owners. Restitution was mandated for families who'd suffered losses. It wasn't perfect justice. William and Mara Holloway were still dead. The town of Ridgeway had still turned its back when courage was required. Silas Mercer had died in the snow instead of facing trial. But it was something. It was accountability. It was proof that standing up mattered, that one person's courage could topple an empire built on fear and silence. That evening, after the courthouse had emptied and the journalists had rushed to file their stories, Ethan sat with Lena and Sarah in their hotel suite. Lena was exhausted, emotionally spent, but there was something different in her eyes, a lightness that hadn't been there before. "It's really over?" she asked. "The trial is," Ethan said. "The rest is just cleanup." "What happens to the farm?" "Our land?" Sarah answered. "Marshall Davies said the property will be returned to you. You're the legal heir. When you turn 18, it'll be yours to do with as you wish. Until then, I'll hold it in trust." "I don't want to go back there. Is that wrong?" "Nothing you feel is wrong, sweetheart. That place holds painful memories. Someday maybe you'll be ready to reclaim it, turn it into something new, or maybe you'll sell it and use the money for something else. Either way, it's yours. Your father's legacy to you." Lena was quiet, processing. Then she looked at Ethan. "What about you? What happens now?" He'd been thinking about that question for weeks, turning it over during sleepless nights and long train rides. For 3 years, his life had been defined by revenge, by the hunt for Silas Mercer, by rage and grief, and the kind of emptiness that came from losing everything. But revenge was finished now. Justice had been served. And he was still here, still breathing, still needed. "Your aunt offered me a job," he said, "managing some business interests her late husband left behind. I'm thinking about taking it." Lena's face lit up. "You're staying in St. Louis?" "For a while anyway. See how it goes." "Why?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I didn't think you were the settling type." "I wasn't, but I'm tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of letting grief make my decisions." He looked at Lena. "Someone wise once told me that family is who shows up when it matters. I'd like to keep showing up, if that's okay with you." It's more than okay," Lena said, and threw her arms around him. Over her head, Ethan met Sarah's eyes, saw understanding there, and approval, and the beginning of something that might, given time, become family in more than just the abstract. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Ethan stood at the train station with Lena and Sarah, watching Ben Carver prepare to board the westbound train back to Montana. The old trapper had stayed for the trial, testified about finding Ethan and Mara and Lena in the wilderness, then lingered in St. Louis through summer, claiming he needed to make sure everyone was settling properly. The truth was simpler. Ben, like Ethan, had discovered that mattering felt better than isolation. "You could stay," Sarah offered. "There's always room, always work." Ben smiled, shook his head. "City's not for me. Too many people, too much noise. But I appreciate the offer." He knelt down, addressed Lena directly. "You keep being brave, little one. Keep telling the truth even when it's hard. Your parents would be proud of who you're becoming." "Thank you for saving us," Lena said. "For finding us when we needed finding. Thank you for reminding an old man why doing right matters." He stood, shook Ethan's hand. "Take care of them, Cole. You've got something rare here. Don't waste it." "I won't." The train whistle blew. Ben boarded, disappeared into a passenger car. They watched the train pull away, carrying him back to his mountain solitude, to the life he'd chosen but was no longer running to. Walking back to the carriage, Lena slipped her hand into Ethan's. "Do you miss it? Montana? The wilderness?" "Sometimes, but I don't miss being alone." "Good, because we need you here." Sarah smiled from Lena's other side. What she said. The months turned into years. Ethan managed Sarah's business interests with the same methodical competence he'd once brought to tracking outlaws. The work was different, but the skills transferred. Attention to detail, reading people, understanding when to push and when to wait. He was good at it. More importantly, it gave him purpose beyond grief. He kept his promise to write to Lena, though it became unnecessary when he moved into a small house 3 blocks from Sarah's mansion. He attended her school recitals and helped with arithmetic homework and taught her to shoot properly because she'd asked, and he couldn't think of a good reason to refuse. Sarah and he circled each other carefully, 2 people damaged by loss learning to trust again. There was no dramatic declaration, no single moment when friendship shifted into something more. Just a gradual recognition that they fit together, that shared purpose had become shared life, that the family they'd created from tragedy and necessity was real despite its unconventional origins. They married quietly 2 years after the trial, in Sarah's parlor with Lena standing between them, officially making permanent what had already been true for months. Lena grew up fierce and stubborn and brilliant, everything her parents had hoped she'd be. She studied law at a women's college, came home with radical ideas about justice and reform that would have made William Holloway laugh with delight. At 22, she returned to Montana Territory, not to Ridgway but to Helena, where she joined the Territorial Attorney's Office prosecuting corruption and theft. She wrote letters home every week, long detailed accounts of cases and challenges and small victories. Ethan and Sarah read them together over breakfast, watching their daughter, because that's what she was, regardless of biology, change the world one case at a time. On her 25th birthday, Lena made a pilgrimage to Ben's cabin in the mountains. The old trapper had died the previous winter, peaceful in his sleep, but she needed to see the place where her mother had spent her final days, where Ethan had nearly died, where courage had been tested and found sufficient. She brought flowers for her mother's cairn, stood in the snow where her father's sacrifice had led, where her mother's determination had carried them, where a stranger had chosen to stop running and start standing. "I did it, Mama," she said to the silent stones. "I finished what you and Papa started. Judge Hale died in prison last year. The families got their land back. The territory has new laws about property rights and judicial oversight. It's not perfect, but it's better. You made it better." The wind carried her words away into the mountains. Somewhere an eagle cried. The world kept turning, indifferent to human drama, but changed nonetheless by the people who refused to look away. 10 years after the trial, on the anniversary of William Holloway's death, a monument was unveiled in Helena's main square. It bore the names of everyone who'd stood up to Judge Hale's corruption, everyone who'd testified, everyone who'd risked something for truth. At the top, in letters larger than the rest, 2 names, William Holloway and Mara Holloway. Below that, an inscription. They stood when others looked away. They spoke when others stayed silent. They proved that one person's courage can change everything. Lena stood at the unveiling with Ethan and Sarah, older now, but still that fierce, determined girl who'd watched her father die and refused to let it be meaningless. Around them, families who'd gotten their land back gathered to remember. Journalists documented the ceremony for newspapers across the territories. Children who'd grown up hearing the story of the well that swallowed truth looked at the monument and learned that justice was possible. "Think they'd be proud?" Lena asked, looking up at her parents' names carved in stone. "I think they already were," Ethan said. "Everything they did was to give you a future. Look what you've built with it." "We built it, all of us. You and Mama Sarah and Marshall Davies and Ben. All the people who decided standing up mattered more than staying safe." Sarah put her arm around Lena's shoulders. "Your father used to say goodness compounds, that one person's courage inspires another's. I think he'd be happy to see how far the ripples spread." The ceremony concluded. The crowd dispersed. The three of them stood there a moment longer, looking at names carved in granite, permanent reminders of the cost of courage and the power of refusing to look away. Then they turned and walked home together through streets where truth still mattered because people had fought to make it so. That evening, in the house they'd made together, Ethan sat at his desk and pulled out the letter he'd been writing. Not to anyone in particular, just thoughts, reflections, the kind of thing a man wrote when he needed to make sense of his life. He wrote about Emma and Sarah, his first family taken by fire and grief, about the years of running, of rage, of hollow existence, about a girl collapsing in the snow and the choice to finally stop looking away, about Mara's courage, Lena's strength, Ben's quiet heroism, about how purpose found you when you stopped running from it, about how family was built, not born, how home was made, not inherited, how justice was fought for, not given, how one person could change everything if they just stood up when everyone else looked away. He wrote about second chances and hard-earned peace and the weight of mattering. When he finished, he folded the pages carefully and placed them in a drawer with other letters, other memories, other pieces of the story that had brought him here. Someday Lena might want to read them, might want to understand the full arc of what her parents started and how many lives it changed. Or maybe she already knew. Maybe she'd learned it the day she stood in that courtroom and told the truth despite every reason to stay silent. Maybe she'd learned it from William and Mara, who taught her that some things were worth standing for even when standing was dangerous. Downstairs, Sarah called that dinner was ready. Lena's voice answered, young and bright and full of the future her parents had died securing. Ethan stood, closed the drawer, and went to join his family. The well in Ridgeway still stood, though the town around it had changed. New families had moved in after the trials, people who didn't carry the shame of looking away. The well had been cleaned, restored, turned into a memorial. A plaque explained what had happened there, what it had cost, what it had changed. Children played nearby now, unafraid. Their parents drew water without fear. The town had been given a second chance it hadn't deserved, but had, slowly, earned. And on certain mornings when the light hit just right, you could almost see them. William Holloway checking his documents one last time before confronting power. Mara Holloway standing on her porch with a shotgun, choosing her daughter's future over her own survival. Ethan Cole running toward a fallen child when everyone else looked away. Lena growing up fierce and determined, carrying her parents' courage forward into a world that needed it. The well that had swallowed truth had finally given it back. And the town that had looked away had learned, too late for some, but not for all, that silence was never safety and courage always mattered. The story spread across territories, across generations, became legend, then lesson, then the kind of truth that changed how people thought about standing up and speaking out. William Holloway's careful documentation inspired other clerks to pay attention, to question, to record. Mara Holloway's sacrifice reminded mothers that protecting children sometimes meant fighting instead of fleeing. Lena's testimony showed that even the smallest voice could change everything if it spoke truth clearly enough. And Ethan Cole, the man who'd been dead inside for 3 years, discovered that the best way to honor the family he'd lost was to build a new one from the broken pieces he'd found along the way. In the end, that's what mattered, not the revenge or the justice or the trials, just the simple fact that when a little girl fell in the snow, someone finally ran to help. And that choice, that one moment of refusing to look away, had changed everything that came after. The well still held water. But now it also held memory and meaning and proof that one person standing up could topple empires built on silence and fear. The sun set over Helena. In houses across the territory, families gathered for dinner. Children asked questions about right and wrong. Parents tried to answer. And somewhere in the margins between what was and what could be, the legacy of William and Mara Holloway lived on in every person who chose courage over comfort, truth over silence, standing up over looking away. It wasn't perfect. Justice never was. But it was enough. And enough, William had always believed, was worth dying for. His daughter proved he was right.